Hello and welcome to the final and third part of the Capaldi era discussion with myself and Adam Martin. Today we're going to be rounding off with Series 10 and some overall thoughts. So I would recommend you check out the Series 8 and Series 9 ones first. I know that they're very long, but so I imagine this one might be too. For context of what's in this video, you'll probably most likely would want to watch those first. And most of you, I imagine, probably will have watched them first. But I recommend it, just because I think a lot of the contention is in those two. Whereas I think this one will be interesting, because I don't know, I'm not 100% sure where we both land on this comparatively. So it's a bit of I think this one's a bit of a mystery at the moment, but we'll see. So, yeah, Series 10, which came out in 2017. Yeah. So, interesting. This one's a bit of an oddity for me, because unlike the last two, I actually quite like this one. Which I think, considering that I've followed your Twitter for a while, if I'm correct, I believe you have the opposite opinion. Like, I know you like Series 10, but isn't this your least favorite Capaldi season?
It is my least favorite Capaldi season, but I don't, like you're saying, I don't hate it by any stretch. It's just, it just happens to be the third of three sort of thing, you know?
Yeah,
it's just I like the other two more.
It's a bit like, I have that with Series 2 with Tenant, where it's like, I love Series 2, but it's just not Series 3 and Series 4, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And like, I have been, partly in anticipation to this, but also partly just because there was a lot of Season 10 that was a bit, like when we did the Series 8 and 9 videos, a lot of it was still like fresh in my head, just like memory-wise, but I had a few blank spots with Series 10, so I've rewatched a few to sort of plug in those gaps. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we both come up with. But do we lead with Dr. Mysterio? Is that technically Season 10?
Well, we haven't
Series 10?
Well, we haven't talked about it, so we might as well. I don't really know what to say about this.
It seems like a lot of people don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's. Let me put it this way: it's one of those ones where like everyone tells me it's terrible, and I'm like,
okay.
I feel like there's justified reasons for why they say that, but I also don't feel that way either. I'm just sort of like, I just don't really talk about this episode ever.
Yeah, I feel this one, especially at the time, was almost, people were almost shooting it before it had even gone out to air, like before it had a chance. As soon as they announced it was going to have like, a superhero element, I feel loads of people shat on it just for that, because 2016, it was like nearing the peak of like the whole Marvel cinematic universe thing in cinemas, and
that's the year,
people doing the whole
that's the year Captain America Civil War came out.
It is, and I feel people just doing the whole like, Doctor Who's like trying to nab like the popular thing, and they're trying to do the MCU, when it's like, I'm like, guys, this is Doctor Who. You think they're going to do the MCU with Doctor Who? It's like they're just doing a superhero thing. And I mean, I remember at the time I had a lot of fun with it, like, because 2016 was a particularly shit year, both on the world stage, and all that sort of stuff. So I just tried to enjoy it, and yeah, it's not perfect, and there are things I don't like about it, but for the most part, I had a lot of fun. Like, it's a fun superhero, it's Doctor Who being silly, like Doctor Who can be, and I appreciate that every once in a while.
I think the problem I had was that I feel like it would have worked better if they'd actually taken the piss. Because I felt like they just kind of straight-faced, unironically did a superhero episode. And I was like, I was thinking, like, surely, I was thinking it would have been better if it was more in the tone of like Robot of Sherwood, where they're like being a bit more tongue-in-cheek with it.
That could have worked.
It's not really what happened. We sort of just got like an unironically, oh look, there's a character that's almost exactly like Superman.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a bit of a flip on. I mean, we've talked about the 12th Doctor's character like mellowing perhaps too fast at the start of Series 9, but and like you look at how he is with I can't remember his name, which is what's the child's name in this?
No idea.
The super?
No idea.
What the ghost? So I'll call him that. Yeah. When he's a kid, like the way Capaldi acts with him as a kid is very different to the way he acts with Rupert Pink in Listen.
Yeah.
And I know like that is more early Series 8. He is very sort of sharp with everyone, regardless of who they are.
Yeah.
And it's very different, but I'd always argue it feels a little bit. I'm a bit more cool with it here because now it feels like his character's had enough time to mellow out. Whereas if this had happened, if this was the Series 8 Christmas special, it would have felt again like too big of a jump, I suppose. Like we sort of said about the Series 9 opener.
Well, the funny thing you say about Capaldi actually, because I feel like this is the one episode in his whole run where I don't feel like he's giving everything he has to it. Because I think as an actor, like in pretty much every episode, he's gone full steam ahead. But in this one, I don't know. I feel like he's just sort of coasting a little bit. And to be fair, because it's Peter Capaldi, coasting is still quite a high bar. But but I think this one is he's noticeably less interested in this one compared to everything else that he did in his run.
Yeah, I mean, because outside of the whole superhero thing and sort of being true to like the whole you are your own superpower or whatever, like it doesn't really. It is one of those very. I'm not going to say flimsy, but more like, it's the whimsy Christmas special Moffat loves to do. It doesn't really have much relevance to anything else. It's just a fun, and for a fun slice on Christmas Day, like fine, that's great. But I do get what you mean. And I guess maybe on like the script front, because this is very much like you say a straight superhero script. Maybe it's a case of. Because a lot of emphasis is on the ghost as the superhero, it doesn't necessarily leave the Doctor with that much to do, apart from sort things out as and when needed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of...
Yeah. It's almost like he's not the main... Also, and the Doctor doesn't always have to be the main.
Nardole is completely unnecessary in this one. He's just there.
But do you think that was... Well, I say it's because he's a late addition, but there was a whole year between his first appearance and this. But do you think... Do we know if he was like written late into the script? Or?
I think he was a late addition until like Oxygen or Extremis, to be honest.
Yeah, because there's those early series 10 episodes, isn't there, where he's sort of scattered throughout it at the beginning and the end. Yeah. He's just not really needed. Yeah,
but
I mean, as I say, like if I watch it now, I can still like have fun with it. It's one of those where I'm not really gonna rip it to shreds because I don't really see like the point. But
I do think this is one of the episodes that Moffat put like the least work into, because if you think about it, obviously he's homaging to Superman, so the story's already built in for him, and then also you've got the fact that he used the same villains from the Husbands of River Song as well.
I always forget it's the same villain.
So I feel like this is one of the ones where Moffat just sort of threw his hands in the air and went, here we go. Christmas special, Superman's in it.
Gotta keep that Christmas slot, you know what I mean?
yeah. Like, there's a couple of episodes. I mean, and the thing is that it's weird, because like earlier in his era when he was really busy with like Tintin and Sherlock and the 50th, I could understand why he would do that, like with Doctor in the Wardrobe, for example, where he didn't really give his all in that. But with Return of Dr. Mysterio, I don't really see why he did that, because he wasn't as busy. It may have just been thrown on him at the last minute, and he just had to be like, well, fuck, I have to think of a Christmas special now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if that was the case, say he had Series 10 planned out, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you've got to have a Christmas special, but you can't have the new companion just yet.
I think like some of the actors in Return of Dr. Mysterio that aren't Capaldi, like the performances are a bit wooden.
Okay. Anyone in particular, or
like mainly the guy who plays the ghost and the woman who's with him?
Oh, what's it? I can't remember her name. That's bad.
No.
I want to say Lucy, but that could be completely wrong.
Probably. I don't. I just they were just so. I mean, I know, because the thing is like if you think about a story like Daleks in Manhattan, like the American characters in that are very cliche, but it's almost, again, like I said, it's tongue-in-cheek cliche. Like it's almost they're forcefully being over the top so that it's funny. Whereas in Return of Dr. Mysterio, the American characters are just sort of unironically wooden and cheesy, and there's not really much self-awareness to it. You know what I mean?
Which I suppose maybe leans into what you said, like maybe if they'd gone full parody, it might have worked better, because it's
I think if you were going to do a Christmas special with like a superhero in it, I feel like maybe Russell T Davies would have been better, because he could really bring out that like cheese that he does in some of his specials, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think like
you think about stories like Voyage of the Damned and End of Time, like that kind of really whack, like over the top, I'm making fun of Hollywood tone that he does. He also does it in Next Doctor with the big Cyberman as well.
He does. He does.
And it's very silly, but I feel like that's the kind of tone that this story would have needed. Whereas I feel like the sort of whimsy, unironically, oh look, it's lovely Christmas time, Stephen Moffat thing doesn't really work as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, the last thing I have to say on it is there's a Pokemon joke in it because, of course, there is. It was the year of Pokemon Go, so Moffat was like, "Yes, cultural references, yes."
Yeah, of course.
So
there is one part of that episode I really like. It's the bit at the very end when Capaldi gives his little speech about, things are gone and it's sad, but then things are happy or something like that. I think he was referring to Hellbent and Husband's Forever Song, the fact that he's lost 2 friends in the last 2 episodes, which I think is earned.
Yeah.
The only thing is it's immediately kind of ruined by that squishy toy thing. Which
Oh yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, no, I know what you. I think that's something, and we might have discussed it before, but sometimes Moffat sort of dredges in his Christmas episodes where like you can have like multiple tones, like that's fine, but it's almost like he jumps between them. There's not like a natural progression. I say it's almost like too sharp. It's like, oh, we've had this mostly light-hearted episode. Now we're going to have a really deep speech. And now, look, it's the squishy toy. Haha, remember, comedy.
Yeah, no.
So, yeah, it just doesn't feel natural a lot of the time, the shifts. But, as I say, like, it's fine. It's not particularly offensive. Do you know what I mean? There's worse.
I'd say it's a below average story. But it's not it's not one of the worst. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I suppose that's all I got. I really don't care about it, so I think I want to move on. Sorry.
Let's do it. Let's get into the series as a whole.
Yes, Series 10. So let's get to the actual Series 10, the one that everyone wants to talk about. So, Clara's gone for the first time in 5 years, believe it or not, because she was there from 2012 to 2015. Yeah, because then obviously there was the specials and they had that gap. So this is the first new companion since Series 7A, which is just wild how that happened. But yeah. I suppose Moffat liked to keep his companions around a bit longer. But yes, Bill Potts. Bill Potts is the companion of Series 10, which is, I think, even people who liked Clara would say that what you want to be doing with each companion is you want to present something different each time. And I think that Bill Potts was a great move because she's very, very, very different to not just Clara, but a lot of companions that we'd had before. And arguably even all of New Who to some extent. But especially in the Moffat era, like Bill couldn't be more different from Amy and Clara, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I know, like, again, when she was announced, a lot of people were jumping saying, "Oh, like you've got another like human from somewhere in England," and like, yes, you can make that criticism, but again, like you just said, like Bill is so, when you break it down, she's so wildly different to, I'd agree with you, than any other New Who companion that we've seen. The one I'd probably if I had to like closely align her to another New Who companion, in terms of how she acts and stuff, it would maybe be Martha. There are some moments throughout this series which remind me of, sort of what would Martha do, and sort of similar thing. We'll get to that when we get there. But yeah, she's such a lovely breath of fresh air, and considering especially with the pilot, hence the title, Moffat sort of wanted to do that soft reboot. I feel she was just the right kind of companion to do that with.
Yeah, I do. I will say though, off that comment, I do think that Bill has a lot less tension than Martha, because because obviously with Martha and the Doctor, there is an intellectual chemistry, but there's also a very intense misunderstanding down to circumstance.
Yes.
And whereas with Bill, now to be fair, we do get Lie of the Land, but we'll get to that later. But with Bill Potts, the dynamic is much more obviously it's set up as university teacher and tutor, even though she doesn't go to that university. She's just serving the chips, but she's just interested in what he's doing. But it's Bill doesn't pine after the Doctor like some companions do, and I'm not saying that pining is necessarily bad. It's part of what makes some companions relatable. But in terms of being different to previous ones, her relationship with the Doctor is nowhere near as intense as a lot of ones from New Who, which is probably the thing that makes it the most different. I think you could possibly argue that Chris Chibnall has also kind of gone on that whole thing of not being as intense, especially with like Ryan and Graham. But we're talking in the context of 2017. Like, you think about like Rose, Martha, Donna, Amy, and Clara were all very, very, very close to the Doctor. Like, almost to...
They were.
To like a, you know, a life-threatening level. Whereas with Bill, what was refreshing about her is that she was really interested in the Doctor, and they had a lot of fun, but also she was happy to just go off and, you know, do her own thing. And I think that was such a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, it's that whole thing of not being, like, someone who can be with the Doctor and interested in what he's doing and have a bit of fun, but not feel like their life doesn't sort of, I guess, revolve around him. Which, as you say, like, is fine for some companions, because if that's part of the inherent dynamic, then that's fair enough. But it's, you know, it's those moments like when you get that, oh, you're not the most important man in my life, and all, you know, from other companions and stuff, that it's just like, well, you know, as we've mentioned with Clara as well. But again, even then, I thought that fed into like this more so in series 9, the whole, you know, she wants to become the Doctor sort of thing. But yeah, with Bill, it's nice to not have that. Like the pilot on a whole, when they first announced it, and Moffat was doing the whole, oh, we're going for like a soft reboot thing. I remember at the time before it went out, I was a bit like, but because as we mentioned last time, I was really engaged and invested with all the stuff that happened in series 9, like with the finales and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, don't throw all that away, sort of thing. But having said that, like what we got with the pilot, I was actually quite happy with. And to be fair, I again started with, I was in a new house at uni, so a new group of people who hadn't, I think they said they'd used to watch it, like stopped after Tenet maybe. And to be fair, from the pilot, they got back into watching it week after week. So it clearly did its job.
I do think Series 10 appeals much more to a casual audience than Series 8 and 9 did.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is nice. And just going back to Bill for a second, I think also she's quite similar to some Classic Who companions. Obviously, her personality is very 2017, so she has like a modern, you know, sense of humor, modern approach. Things like a Knock Knock when she's, you know, using Spotify and all that, and she's very, you know, she has modern attitudes of our time. But in terms of the way she's characterized and the way she interacts with the Doctor, I feel it's a lot more similar to quite a few companions from Classic Who rather than New Who, and I think that also is quite appealing to people that are more into Classic Who. I have noticed that there are a lot of people that are Classic Who fans that really like Bill Potts because of this.
Okay, yeah. No, I suppose so. I guess maybe they sort of modernized that Classic Who formula, so Bill's not just, you know, screaming or saying, what's this, Doctor, or what do we do, Doctor? But they've evolved it, so as you said, you have that sort of like teacher-student dynamic, but it doesn't, for the most part, feel patronizing, and if it ever does, Bill always like calls him out for it.
Yeah.
Or like there's or not just the Doctor, Nardole, and I mean, I'll just mention it now because it relates. There's that scene in Extremis where, you know, Nardole and Bill are going down, I think, to the source of the problem or whatever, you know, and she's trying to walk ahead of him, but the Doctor told Nardole to keep Bill behind him, and Nardole is quite patronizing to her at first, you know, and she's like, no, don't do that. Whereas you could argue maybe some classic companions would have just towed the line, as it were. So
yeah, it depends on.
I feel
it depends on the scenario, and it depends on the character you're talking about. Because, for example, there are Classic Who companions that would talk back. Like you think about, like
absolutely,
like Zoe and Sarah and all that. They would definitely pipe up and be like, "Hang on a second, no, especially Tegan as well." Jeez.
Oh god, yeah, Tegan. Oh God love Tegan, man. But yeah, no, I'd subscribe to that view though, that Bill, in some respects, is like the modern evolution of a Classic Who companion for the better as well. So
yeah, of course, and it's like I said, a breath of fresh air for sure. Before I get into like the Doctor and some of the stories, I do think there is one thing I will have to say about Series 10, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but in terms of the overall ethos of Doctor Who and where Series 10 ranks when I think about like all of the show, not just New Who. I feel like due to the fact that this series is much safer in its goals, like it's a much more safe approach than the past few years, that does put a bit of a ceiling on it. And I think that's probably one of the things that does hold Series 10 back a little bit. Now, that's not to say that I don't like the stories, because I do. I think Series 10 is very consistent, but I think it's consistently good rather than consistently great, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You feel like there's only, because of how safe they're playing it, you feel like there's only so far they're willing to push, so to speak.
And I think that when I think about New Who, it's one of the ones I'm more favorable towards. But then when I include, like, you know, the entire shows with Classic Who and all that, I think the reason why Series 10 may not rank as high in that regard is probably because Series 10 for me is nice because it reminds me of things I like about Classic Who, but it's also not actually what Classic Who is, if that makes sense. Like, in the sense of, like, when I go back and watch actual Classic Who that Series 10 reminds me of, I usually like that a bit better, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's...
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I do think there's a little bit of a ceiling, and that's not to say that there aren't some great stories, because there are. I do think there is a few little stories that I'll get into that I love, but for the most part, it's just a very consistently good run, rather than one that's... As opposed to, like, when we were talking about Series 8 and 9, which I was very up and down on, where it was like, it was either a classic or a turkey, like, every week for me.
Yeah.
But so for this one, it was a much more laid back, and it was more consistent to watch. But I do have there are things about it that I think hold it back a bit, and I also do have a few criticisms here and there, which we'll get to. It's not a perfect series, but
no. I mean, I think there's no such thing as a perfect Doctor Who series. Really, there are some that maybe straddle close, but I'd argue there hasn't been one yet that's been completely perfect. Not in so.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen a season of television that I'd call perfect.
No, quite, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't think that... It's not really humanly achievable unless you've got some very good resources. It would be very hard. Anyway, so we'll strap right in. So, I'm going to quickly go over my thoughts on the 12th Doctor, and then I'm going to leave my sort of criticisms till much later, because a lot of my criticisms of the 12th Doctor in this series come on like near the end of it rather than at the start.
Sure.
But having said that, for the most part, disregarding my criticisms of certain things that happen, I love Capaldi in Series 10. They found this lovely balance between the Series 8 and Series 9 personas, and they sort of trimmed all the fat off that I didn't like, and they sort of streamlined it into this really lovely homage character, because in the sense, I would say the Series 10 Capaldi Doctor in a lot of ways kind of channels a whole bunch of Doctors all in one, but it's not really a mess of a character either. It's not like a fan servicey character. It's more just Capaldi uses traits that are from previous incarnations as well as his own from the last two seasons, and he sort of blends it into this like three-dimensional personality, and I think that that really is like quite a treat to watch, because I get to see so many different Doctors in one, and yet it doesn't feel jarring. And of course, Capaldi's performances are always great. I love the whole mad professor thing. I love the sort of fresh take on him. And obviously, you know, it is a bit of a shift again. I wouldn't say it's quite as jarring as Series 8 to 9, but it is a bit of a shift. And it is more so, I think, it kind of feels a bit more like a starting point rather than a continuation in some ways.
Sure.
But I really, really enjoy him on the whole. I love the way how he cuts out... I think he did this a little bit previously, but especially in this series, he cuts out a lot of technobabble, and he really isolates scenarios and breaks them down. But also, unlike Series 8 and 9, apart from maybe the Pyramid of the World or something like that, but for the most part, it's very plot focused. Whereas I feel like with something like Series 8 with like Listen, or Series 9 with, you know, some of the stuff there, a lot of that was very character focused. It was like, you know, when you think about the scenes in Listen where he's talking to himself or talking to Clara, it's very much just like talking about the concept of fear, right? And he's talking about himself. He's talking about Clara's emotions and Danny and himself and all that. Whereas in Series 10, it's a lot more focused on what he's doing at hand. I think, and again, going back to the idea of Series 10 being very similar to Classic Who, I think that is very appealing to a Classic Who fan base, because I know that Classic Who fans are more interested in the plot than this sort of character drama, which is one of the big differences. And so you compare that to, you put a scene like in Extremis when he goes to the Oval Office and he's breaking down what's happening in the plot. I love that. I love it when he does that.
Oh, okay.
And it kind of pointed out to me, it's like, this is one of the things that for example, like Matt Smith's Doctor will often brush over what's happening in very, fast dialogue instead of just being like wibbly wobbly whatever. And if you really listen to what he's saying, you can sort of piece together what's happening. But the whole point is that the dialogue's trying to skip over the complicated parts so that it can get right to the sort of entertainment bits, which is, appealing for a casual audience so they don't have to think too hard about the sci-fi. But with something like this, I really appreciated how Capaldi, like a university professor, went through every single scenario and sort of broke down what was happening, and I learned a lot about what was happening. It's almost like the episode taught me about the actual sci-fi elements in it, but it wasn't heavy-handed like a straight to the screen speech. It was done in a sort of, it made sense because the Doctor wants to find out what's happening, so he breaks it down slowly, goes through it, tinkers away at each piece by piece, and it was such an interesting way to write this character, and that's something I loved about him in this. And then obviously there's all the other things, like I think some of the comedy in this series I think is really well handled. Like there's lines like, he's running like a penguin with his ass on fire, and I don't know, there's just something really quite adorable about Bill and the 12th Doctor, and it's very wholesome.
It's a good word for it. It's a very wholesome relationship that they have, which is very endearing. Like
the bickering that they have, it's not intense drama. It's very sort of just tongue-in-cheek, and it's just quite a fun, fluffy series to watch. And I don't know, it's one I can flick on, and I don't have to really think too hard about it to like it. It's just one of those series I can flick on and have fun watching a lot of the episodes. And I feel that's a good sentiment. For the most part, I really liked the 12th Doctor, and especially when we get to like the middle section, I'm going to specifically highlight one point where I thought that the characterization and the performance were really well done. But I'll let you speak first.
No, fair. So yeah, the 12th Doctor. I feel where he's at the start of Series 10 is completely valid. As mentioned in the last time we talked, I wish the shift between Series 8 and 9 had been a bit less severe, shall we say, because then maybe that would have made how he is in Series 10 feel even more impactful. But on the whole, I feel the character's where he should be at this point. And you're right, it's just very fun. You can tell Capaldi's has a lot of fun in this series as a whole. How he's allowed to sort of relax a bit as his character and just be a bit more, as you said, a bit more fun and fluffy, but I'd argue never to like a detriment of his character. It always feels earned, and you can tell he's having fun with the jokes.
Yeah, well, I think,
like, one of my favorite.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to say, I do think his work rate's still really good. It's just that it comes off a lot more effortless because he's having fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they do say that. It's like obviously the more you know a character, because this is his third year in the role, but also, the more fun you're having, it just feels more natural, I guess. Yeah, well, it's just more, I say, effortless.
David Tennant was like that in Series 4. Like, everything he did with Catherine Tate in that series just felt so effortless. Like, it was almost like he was just actually the role, and he was just playing himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is like the peak of where you want to get to, I think. But yeah, one of my favorite jokes, and I love how with the jokes he doesn't have to be all like, I guess, very physical with a lot of them. Like, one of my favorites is in Thin Ice near the beginning, where he's talking about, when Bill's like, oh, but what if I stand on a butterfly, and he starts talking about his mate Pete who disappeared. Like, that whole segment, and the way they keep bringing it up just really makes me chuckle, because you can tell it's like a sort of in-joke that they both have, but like when you have that in-joke with mates, and as soon as you hear it, you just start laughing. Like, I love things like that, and I wish the show as a whole did more, like, not subtle comedy, but less maybe like physical, big out there comedy. Like I just, I love that like words and wit can be such a powerful thing.
I love gentle humor. Like I think a story that exemplifies exactly what you're saying is the Time Meddler, where it's all the comedy is like really gentle and quite. You sort of have to just sort of sink yourself into these characters, and then there's these little funny moments, if you know what I mean. It's not too out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, you can have physical comedy, of course, but I just feel like for this Doctor especially, like his words can be so funny, and that's where the comedy can, like some of the lines in Series 8 aren't even played for like the characters being serious, but they're funny because of, partly the way they're written, but also the way Capaldi delivers it, so it's just a perfect like lining of his character. And I love in the moments where, again, just referring to Thin Ice, there's a moment in there where Bill sees someone die for the first time in her life, and she challenges the Doctor on that, the whole how many people have you seen die, and he doesn't have count, and she asks him how many people have you killed, and he dodges the question before admitting that he has killed people. And from what we've seen maybe in like Series 8 and 9, you might have expected him to sort of, go full, and blow his lid off, I suppose. But he doesn't. He just, calmly hears what she says and explains his reasoning behind it. And I kind of like, again, as a character progression, I kind of like that. Of course, you can have the moments where he sort of loses it and goes wild because, Capaldi's great at that, but also it fits with this incarnation. But I just like that there were many moments like that where someone's losing it at him and he just sort of calmly responds to it, I guess. Like that scene in Thin Ice, I think, is so beautifully played by both of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very student-teacher. And also what I love about that is that it fits in with what we know about... If you've been watching the show since the start of New Who, you'll know why he's saying that, because obviously we know about the Time War and all that. But then also, if you've just started with Series 10, you'll still understand it because you don't need context to understand why that scene works, if you know what I mean. Like, just learning about the fact that the Doctor has actually watched people die and potentially kill people is quite a new, shocking thing to learn. But also, it works in conjunction if you've already seen Series 1 to 9, you'll already know, well, yes, he's been in the Time War, now he's having to tell another person about it. It's a great moment. Like that
and it works even better that he doesn't lose his mind, because I feel if he, if you get challenged on have you killed anyone and you lose your mind, that makes you less sympathetic or less relatable. Like it makes you less of a likable character. I'd argue, because why would you get defend? Whereas he admits it, he doesn't like admitting it. You can see it in his performance, but he doesn't like admitting it. But I feel that the way he addresses it just works a lot better. Because, as you say, if you're a new audience member, you can be like, whoa, okay, like this like hero character has killed people. They might not know why, but the way in which you address it's like, okay, well, I'll stick with you for now, but with a bit more. It's very like, I guess, what Bill would be thinking, because she likes him, she trusts him. But imagine hearing that, this teacher figure you have just admitted to you that they potentially killed someone, like. I'm glad they don't just brush over, it's not just, oh, okay, then, well, you said yes, they...
I know you said this in the Series 9 one as well, but it's a shame that they don't bring up Danny Pink again after Magician's Apprentice, because this would have been a great opportunity for the Doctor to reflect on that, in the sense of, like, it would be like if one of Danny Pink, when Danny Pink's students hear about the fact that he was a soldier, it's kind of a similar scenario.
No, it is. I feel that's sadly, do you think that's sadly a thing of, like, the whole soft reboot motif? Because as far as I remember, we don't get any mentions of Clara apart from that scene in the pilot, which I think didn't make it to transmission, where he's playing the theme on guitar, and there's the only reference to the past series really is Missy.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there are those pictures on his table of River and Susan and all the Sonics, and like there's a Dalek in there, and there's the bit where he's gonna wipe Bill's memory and she reminds him of Clara. So there are bits and pieces that reference back, but a lot of it can be understood even if you haven't seen before this point.
Yeah, I think we said it towards when we discussed the memory wiping thing in Hellbent, didn't we? It's like it is reminding him of Clara, but also it's just a great question to pose to an audience who might not know that, You know, how would you feel if someone did that to you?
Yeah.
I'll give Moffat credit. You know, the whole soft reboot angle he went, I feel a lot of the time he struck that balance really well. Where, as you say, like you have those trimmings for fans who've been watching for a while, but it's not so in your face that new fans are going to be like, "Whoa, what's this about?" I did feel he tread.
I do think it's a bit odd though that there's a soft reboot in Series 10 and then they do another one in Series 11. That was always very strange to me.
Would you argue that was more of a Chibnall decision though, because obviously then he chose to do that rather than?
I'm not. I'm really not sure. I don't have an answer for that, but it's an odd one. I really I would possibly have a guess and say maybe the BBC wanted it. Like after,
I mean, we've seen before the BBC, like the higher ups, if you will, can have influence or like say.
If you notice the first like proper ratings dip, and I'm not saying this necessarily as if it's a dip in quality. I would never do that. I hate populist fallacy. But if you look at it from a business point of view, the first dip in New Who ratings, like that's like kind of significant, is Series 9. And it's possible that maybe the BBC saw that and thought, right, we need to bring back casual viewers straight away.
Right, yeah.
And they may have asked him to do that. And obviously, unfortunately, Series 10 dipped even further, which is a real shame. It's a real shame because there's a whole bunch of people that didn't see it that I think would have actually really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think obviously, like again, no one on the production team's fault. It's scheduling amongst other things, but I think the fact that we went all through 2016 with only one episode didn't help either.
Yeah,
because it's that whole thing of casual viewer, public consciousness, and it sounds really fickle, but I mean, it's that whole thing of if something's not pushed in someone's face often enough, they forget. Or they lose interest, and when you have a year between more than a year between full seasons, that I'd argue that could have partly caused it as well.
And you also have to take into account that Moffat never actually intended to do Series 10 in the first place. The only reason he did it is because Chibnall wanted to do Broadchurch Series 3. So Moffat stayed on.
Which
for
I mean,
another year.
Fair enough. That was his show. I get that, but it's. I think a lot of those things, like you break down, as you say, it to circumstance and stuff. And I think, as I might have said before, year on year, Doctor Who is up against it because, with every new streaming platform or every new digital channel, like the audience numbers are always going to sort of be at the minute, in this, what some people call like a lower region. But yeah, I'll agree that they did dip with like Series 9, and sadly that continued with Series 10, which is a shame. It's a great shame.
Yeah, it's kind of weird thinking about it, though, because originally Moffat's plan was that he was going to leave with Matt Smith at the end of Series 8, was his original plan. And then
Matt Smith was like, see you later.
Matt Smith left at the end of Series 7, and so they cast a new Doctor with Capaldi, and it's like, if Matt Smith hadn't chosen to leave that early, we may never have gotten Heaven Sent.
Yeah, which is
it's kind of crazy, isn't it?
It is kind of crazy. I mean, I think I've said, I don't know if I subscribe to this now. I've said before in the past that maybe Moffat should have left when Matt Smith left. The whole leave with the Doctor you cast sort of thing. Not that producers have to do that. But then, I don't know, in retrospect, I see what we got with the Capaldi era, and whilst, as we've discussed in previous videos, and I'm sure we'll get into as we go along, like, whilst it isn't, it's not perfect, but like, as you said, you think of stories like Heaven Sent and a bunch of the others that people really enjoy and think, wow, if he had gone with Matt Smith, we wouldn't have necessarily got those stories. So, yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
It's a weird one.
How that works.
But I think, on the whole, just to bring it back to the pilot, I think it does I think I've said this before about other stories, but it does what it needs to do very well. Like, if you're going with that whole soft reboot angle, introducing a new companion, re-establishing who the Doctor is, sort of getting him off the ground, I think it does a fab job, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun.
My only real criticism of the pilot is that it's not necessarily a fault in this episode, but just overall, I think the concept of Heather is a bit overpowered, and it kind of makes it's not because I don't have an issue with like really powerful villains at all. In fact, I like it usually, but just I think Heather as an idea, because she's kind of unstoppable, it makes it very odd, and also we'll get to the Doctor Falls, but I have things to say about that.
Oh, okie dokie. Well,
but yeah, I think Heather's a really good character. Like the actual, woman that is Heather, and the way she interacts with Bill and all that, and that's great. But just as a force, like as a teleporting puddle thing, it's really interesting. But I think they made her a bit too limitless for my taste.
okay.
But I think
That's
in
fair.
terms of just the pilot, I think it just gets away with it.
Yeah, just about gets away with it. Yeah.
And I will say
Absolutely.
there are moments in the pilot that I love. Like, I love the bit where the Doctor finally gives up, and because obviously he doesn't want to travel again with anyone after what's happened to him with Clara and River, and then he just suddenly brings the TARDIS outside and says, "What the hell? Let's just go." I love
Yeah.
that scene. So good.
No, it's fab, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, I think it was a good move to exclude Nardole a bit from the next 2 episodes after that, because then it allowed us to get to know Bill better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do love the gag of, like, he goes to make some tea and they go off on two trips and come back in time.
Yeah, he still got it. Yeah, no, I mean, like we said, it probably was down to like partly circumstancy about Nardole being a sort of a late addition, but yes, it does work very well. Even though they do the thing they've done with all modern companions, like the whole we're going to go to the future and now we're going to go to the past.
Yeah.
But the reason why they do it is because it's a formula that works bloody well. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a great.
Well, I mean, the
great
thing
insight.
is that Classic Who did this as well to some extent.
Oh yeah.
And then Russell T Davies, when he brought back Doctor Who, he's like, I want a flavor of everything that we like in this show. So he's like, future, past, modern day, that sort of thing. And so then obviously Moffat took that and said, well, I want to do that too. And it's like you said, it's a formula that works. And
absolutely.
so that brings us to Smile, which I would say is an unexpected hit. Like when I saw the trailer for this, I thought it was going to be god awful, because not only did it have emojis in it, which at the time was like just at this point it's part of normal life, but at that point I was just like, oh, emojis, that's just like Zoomer stuff. and also the fact that it was written by Frank Cottrell Boyce, who did In the Forest of the Night, which I didn't like. I was thinking, okay, I'm not going to like this one. And then I watched it and I was pleasantly surprised. It actually was quite interesting. Now, to be fair, it's a little bit derivative because it's got elements of the Happiness Patrol and it's got elements of the Empty Child in it. But I think it works really well. I think the horror elements are actually quite scary. I think the emoji bots were done about as good as you could get them to be for like a really harmless little episode. I really like the performances and how the actors treat the whole thing of having to smile. I think it's really well done. I love the whole setting. I love the color grading with like the blue and the orange light on it. My only sort of small criticism would be the very end is a bit rushed, but apart from that, I thought it was a really fun episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say we pretty much agree on that one. It's fun, I like you, I think we all saw the trailer and thought, oh, emoji bots, like for God's sake. But like you're saying, there is something very creepy about characters forced smiling, knowing that that their lives. There's something really creepy about that, and I think they pulled that off very well. And the ending is literally, what was it, like turn it on and off again sort of thing. But yeah, the concepts that they were going for, like about humanity fleeing here and people being fed to the soil or whatever. And what I love a lot in this episode are Bill's reactions to things, because this is all, they really get that sense of this is all brand new for her, and it would be shocking and it would be terrifying. And there's that scene, isn't it, where she doesn't really want to go outside the TARDIS. She wants to stay there, which, I think is fair for some people. That's fairly relatable. Not every companion has to blindly follow him at first. I know eventually, like, that's where they get to in a stage of, like, their friendship and all that. But do you know what I mean? I like it that right from the word go, the companion's not just like, oh, I'll blindly follow you no matter what, Because
she has
to Bill, this is...
She has individual instincts.
Yeah, exactly. And I and Bill sort of retains that through a lot of the series, that I guess like the sort of instinctual caution and stuff about things, and some people complain about it, but I really like it just because, again, it's something very different, and it does raise a lot of good questions for us as an audience as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, well, the thing is that, because, again, that just separates her, because if you think about, like, Rose's first adventure, she was a bit trepidatious about what was going on at the end of the world, but her main goal was to get away from the life she was living and escape, and so she really wanted to go outside somewhere. And then, of course, you got, like, Martha in the Shakespeare Code. She was really excited to see Shakespeare. And then, you've got, like, Donna in Vice of Pompeii. Like, again, she was real, like, into it. And then you got Amy, who's gone run away in a fairy tale with Matt Smith and Beast Below and all that. Then you got, like, Clara of the Rings of Akaten. So there's this tradition of, like, the companion's first adventure. They're really, sort of going out and being like, wow, this is something I've never experienced before. Whereas with Bill, because she has, like, modern sort of contemporary instinct, and she doesn't froth over this adventure, she just likes it a little bit. Like, she likes it enough to enjoy it, but she doesn't see it as the be all and end all. She's also just like, well, that I'm sure what's outside is really interesting, but also it could be dangerous, and I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's it. I just like the sort of trepid, like, because like you say, with the other characters, like, their reason for going out there is completely justified, not denying that at all, but I just think it's just refreshing to have something different from that, like someone who actually questions. Yeah, because some companions did that in the classic series, the whole should we go outside and is it dangerous and all that sort of stuff.
I mean, Victoria Waterfield's probably the biggest example of that, like her anxiety and all that. But then, of course, you had.
But again, like, I think that trait's completely valid in people. You've just been whisked away in this time machine by someone you sort of know, but not really, and now all of a sudden you're in like the far future. Like, of course, that's gonna set some people off with anxiety. I think it's. I just like how they handled it as well. They didn't make it this big overblown thing either, which sometimes Moffat Who tends to do with people's emotions. They feel they have to make it this huge spectacle, like, every single time.
Yes.
And I argue sometimes it's valid, but in a case like this with Bill, it's not, and I'm glad they didn't push for that. They just sort of kept it as she's a bit anxious about it, and that's okay. Do you know what I mean?
I would say
that
Bill,
angle.
Bill is like the polar opposite of spectacle. Like, even in like the even in the big episode, she still feels chill. To some extent,
very relaxed.
Yeah, and I also think it was smart to have her first adventure be a story where there's no side characters in sight, so it just gives time for the Doctor and Bill to just talk with each other one-on-one. Yeah,
and there's some of the best moments where it's just the two of them chatting or discussing things. No, it's a great continuation, great fun. Nothing too brilliant or stand out, but it's fun, and that's great. And I'm glad people. I notice more people down the line do enjoy Smile a lot more, and it's just nice to see.
Yep, and then we have Thin Ice.
Thin Ice.
So Thin Ice is interesting. I think I liked it a lot more when I first saw it. And I definitely agree with you on the Dr. Bill character moments, like what you said with, have you ever seen anyone die? Have you ever killed anyone? That's great.
Yeah.
I love all that, and I love... Actually, to be fair, I also love the cliffhanger between Smile and Thin Ice. It felt like classic Who, Or they just end up on the Thames.
Just like appearing somewhere new. Yeah,
cool. And oh my god, the costumes.
Oh, I know.
I love those costumes.
All of them, like Capaldi and Pearl Mackie, and they're just beautiful. Like...
And I like the episode. It's a lot of fun. But I do think I'm one of those people that doesn't like it quite as much as a lot of other people, especially on Twitter. It might just be a slight difference in like taste and attitude, because there's episodes that are very similar to Thin Ice that I like that they don't. I've noticed a common trend of like Thin Ice is a very... I gotta be careful with my words there, but I feel like, personally, I think Thin Ice, in terms of not outside of the things we've just discussed, but just talking about like the actual self-contained plot itself and all the characters that are introduced in that, I feel like it's quite a crowd-pleasing story. And that's not just that's not necessarily a bad thing, but in terms of the way it's written and the way it's framed and the sort of soul it has is quite crowd-pleasing, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And
is that in like particular aspects, or?
Yeah, so in terms of the way it handles the fact that there's obviously a fish being caught, trapped under the ice. So it's obviously there's part of it is very much it's compassion for animals, which is something we have seen before, like in stuff like The Beast Below and all that. And then there's also the way it handles the villain, like the racist villain.
Sutcliffe,
he's very, very very villainous in almost to the point of being caricatured. And for example, there's the scene where he calls Bill a creature and then the doctor punches him in the face.
I see. Sorry, go on. Do you want me to explain?
Well, I was just going to say that I know a lot of people really like that scene because it's satisfying to see the doctor punch an evil person, but that's exactly what I'm saying by crowd pleasing, if that makes sense. It's not a very nuanced approach to racism, capitalism, animal abuse, blah, 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 all of that. It's not a very nuanced approach. It's a very simple approach to this. And for me, that's not anywhere near as compelling as other stories that do this much more complex, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Like, in regards to that scene with the punch, like, I like that scene in concept, especially I liked it at the time because I didn't see it coming. I think the only problem I have with it is like the dialogue itself, like where he calls Bill a creature. Like, I don't like, for a character of that time, I didn't have a problem with that dialogue because I could picture someone saying that. I think the problem I had with it was and I don't know whether this was down to direction or the actor's delivery of it, because he arrives in that scene, you know, saying, "Oh, you're from the club," you know, he's very calm, just, "Oh, you're from the club, welcome," and then as soon as he sees Bill, he literally snaps from 0 to 100 in like a millisecond. Yeah, there's not even like I feel his outrage might have been more. It would have felt more in line with a person of this time if, say, he just said, like, you know, calmly said, "Who the hell's this?" And then Bill spoke back to him, and then he started losing his shit because, you know, he can't comprehend, you know, someone of color speaking back to him. But instead, we get this thing of he flips 0 to 100 in a millisecond. And when you talk about caricature, that was the only moment for me where it felt the most caricature, when he just flips like that. There is a line in it that gets across his hateful racist views better. It's when, I think, just after that, when they've been tied up and he's sat at his desk. I can't remember exactly what he says, but I think he's explaining what's going on, and Bill's like, "I don't get it," or something, and he says something like, "Oh, I wouldn't expect your kind to understand," or something like that. But that felt less of a caricature and more of an intent of, wow, you know, this guy is just a fucking racist and a horrible person. Do you know what I mean? That made more sense to go at it like that rather than just flip it.
Because I think there are other stories that execute this much more cleverly. Like, I think probably one that comes to mind is Human Nature, Family of Blood. Whenever there's racist remarks towards Martha, it's really well executed in terms of the characters, I think. Personally, I think it's done really well. I know some people don't, but I think it is.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean about the crowd-pleasing element, but I know for me, like don't get me wrong, I love some complex storytelling and nuanced storytelling, but I also appreciate sometimes when things are laid out a bit more, I guess, a bit more simply, if that's right, or a bit more straightforward.
I think isn't there a joke in that episode about, like, Jesus being blacker than history says? I swear he says that.
Yeah, no, it's a thing where they're on the Frost Fair and Bill says, "Oh wow, it's interesting. Regency England's a bit more black than they show in the movies," and the Doctor says, "So was Jesus. History's a whitewash." And I know, like, I know some people. I adore that line because I just think, it's true. So I just, like, I know, like, that some people say, "Oh, it's too this, it's too that," but I think Doctor Who's always been a show that isn't shy about necessarily expressing a view on something, whether that's about, you know, climate change or racism. So I didn't have a problem with that line. I was like, because when I thought about it, I was like, Bill's got a point. You know, you look at any film, maybe not, well, now it's a bit different, but, you know, look at any film of the last 50 years that focuses on, you know, Regency England. And, you know, of course, back then there were black people around in history, but you watch the films and it's all white people. And so yeah, I appreciate that line, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's also not just the racism as well. It's the way it handles the caged animal, I suppose you could say, because it's under the ice, so it's a form of caging. It's like I suppose you could say it's an almost an atmospheric prison, if that makes sense. Or like a climate prison. And then there's, the bit at the end where it's like, it's the classic thing of, when the villains are defeated and the racist falls into the ice and presumably dies, the children run into the rich people's house and eat their dinner and all that. It's very, I'm not sure if cartoony is the right word, but it was very crowd.
I hear what you mean.
I feel.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I can't deny, like, this episode always brings, like, it brings me a warmth and a smile, so maybe I play into that. But I enjoy it for that aspect. I enjoy an episode of Doctor Who that maybe just, that every now and then will maybe set out to, if we're going with that view, like, sets out to please me. Like, I haven't got as, if it did it every week, I'd be a bit like, oh, come on, like, give me something different. But every now and then I appreciate an episode like that. And I mean, I just think the way Sarah Dollard writes, because obviously she wrote Face the Raven as well.
Yeah.
And I just feel a lot of the time the way she writes characters and dialogue, I really enjoy. It connects with me a lot. Like, I think out of all the scripts in Series 9, on a script level, Face the Raven probably connected with me the most.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Face the Raven, I think her, like, firm fist approach to writing works really well in Face the Raven because it's quite an intense story. It's very intense drama. Thin Ice could not be more different in tone to Face the Raven. Like, it's a very different story to Face the Raven. And don't get me wrong, I like Thin Ice, and I may sound like I'm overreacting, but I just think that it's not as nuanced as some other stories, and I don't think it's quite on the same level as quite a few other stories that are tackling similar ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fair enough. That's absolutely fair enough. I think, as I say, I like it for what it does. I appreciate what it does. The memorable moments, as we can call them. I do really enjoy them, even if they are a bit on the nose and not really that nuanced. Like, one of my, well, it's weird to say favorite, but one of my standout moments is actually at the beginning when they arrive and Bill quite rightly goes, hang on, 1814, slavery's still a thing. And the look on Capaldi's face when that sort of registers with him, I think is what, like, it's such a small moment, but it's really brilliant, because you can tell this character's just thought, oh fuck, I've brought my new companion to this time period. And you can, I think it's fair to say, initially, he completely overlooked that fact.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the Shakespeare Code, the Doctor almost completely overlooks that with Martha when she brings that up. Yeah. And he's sort of like, he's just sort of trying to figure, he's like, well, I mean, not really. I mean, if you just act like you own the place, people won't cut you off and you'll be by my side. It's like, and in a lot of ways, it's like, it's almost like the Doctor doesn't really think about these sorts of things because he doesn't really see race because he's an alien.
Yeah, which I think is fine, like, on principle, because he's an alien, so why would he doesn't see that as a big issue. But what I liked about this moment in Thin Ice is just how when Bill says it, how we actually take a moment for that to register with the Doctor. How, because I know it doesn't really get mentioned again, obviously apart from the stuff with Sutcliffe, but they do move past it. But I just appreciate how the Doctor, even as an alien, takes a moment to just sort of stop and realise how important this fact does mean to Bill and how it worries her. Like, I don't know, I just appreciate that moment. Rather than him just going, oh, don't worry about it. Like, we're time travelers. It's, or something like that. Something blasé. Like, because I think, well, I mean, you know what I mean, though.
I know what you mean. I mean, it would feel a bit out of character for the 12th Doctor in Series 10 to do the same thing that Tennant did in the Shakespeare Code, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. So, it might be a small moment, but they are different.
Like, the 10th Doctor is much more blasé, especially at that point. And he sort of just, it kind of ignores a lot of the consequences around him, which does have an impact on him, character-wise.
Yeah.
Whereas the 12th Doctor, obviously because he's much more mature, much more sort of a, in the university role, and isn't, he's, you get what I'm saying. I can't quite put it into words.
I do.
But
yeah,
it makes sense why he's a lot more responsive to that now.
Yeah.
Comparatively. Anyway, so
absolutely.
I like Thin Ice, but not as much as I did, I think, the first time.
That's fair enough, man.
Yeah.
That's fair enough.
Knock Knock is the one after that.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah,
it's a funny little story. What were you going to say?
I was going to say the binaural 3D sound one that they hyped up for ages. Go on iPlayer and listen to it in binaural audio, which I still think either I haven't done it or I've done it and just not heard the difference. But
yeah. I actually really like Knock Knock. I don't know if that's a hot take, but I think it's quite good. I think it's a bit of a Marmite episode. It depends on what kind of horror scares you. And for me, the creepy crawly ants really do get under my skin. So that was a big thing for me. And then also the other thing is I love David Suchet's performance in this story. I think he's fantastic. He's and I love the twist that it's his mother rather than his daughter. I think that's a great twist. And I just love the whole aesthetic. It's quite gothic. I love the sort of the very wooden feel and the sort of the candlelight and all that. It's a very tried and tested aesthetic that works. And I like the whole thing of Bill's with her housemates. She's kind of trying to move out and break out and be her own independent person away from her foster carer. And the fact that the doctor's interfering when she doesn't really want him around, because this is, again, tying into the whole thing of her saying, well, I actually have my own life as well. It's not just traveling with you. And I like how the doctor's trying to fit in with all these 2017 modern young adults, but it's really awkward. He's trying to figure out what Spotify is.
That's one of my favorite moments when he's little mix and you just see his face it's so brilliant.
Yeah. And I just think it's a really fun story. I have one gripe with it though. I don't like how all the people come back to life at the end.
Yeah, I think it's this sort of thing I think we've talked about before. I know it wasn't written by Moffat, but he is the showrunner, so I don't know whether it might have been his input or not. But it's this sort of thing that occurs, let's say, in the Moffat era a lot about characters facing consequences. I guess it's death isn't a certain thing in Moffat's Who, compared to say in RTD's Who, when it's the first one that popped in my head. I don't know why, but Linda Moss in The Parting of the Ways, right?
Yes.
She's a character we all like, we all love her. She's very, very cute, very relatable. We'd all love to see her, survive and go on or whatever. But then the Daleks kill her, and it's very surprising. It's very out of the blue, but it's very powerful because a fun character has just died. But she doesn't get reversed to. Well, I know Captain Jack does, but that's different. But, she doesn't get reversed to life at the end. That's it. She's dead. I think I say this a lot about the RTD era. When characters die, there's not 95% of the time, there's a finality about it. Yeah. It's when a character dies, they're dead.
Usually,
not to sound cruel, but
usually if they're resurrected, there's a purpose, I find. There are a couple of exceptions, and funnily enough, Moffat was part of those decisions being made.
Funny that, but
two examples that come to mind are the humans in New Earth. Moffat said apparently that he said to Russell, he said, well, killing them all off would be a predictable choice or something like that, and it eventually I think Moffat said something along the lines of oh, you always kill off your side characters, why can't you just let them live for once? And Russell basically said, okay, well, I'll do that then. And Moffat was saying it doesn't matter if the ending doesn't make sense, just have that lovely moment where the doctor says, I'm the doctor,
that
I
sounds
killed
about
them.
right, doesn't it? So
and then there was also the other thing of with in the Doctor's Daughter, when Moffat said, well, killing off Jenny would just be the predictable thing to do, and so Jenny was brought back.
And never seen again.
And it's just for me, I think with New Earth, I can kind of let it slide because I do like that scene. I think it's quite a fun scene when all the people come back, even though the alternative of them dying and the Doctor having to live with that would have been also interesting. But I absolutely think that Jenny should have stayed dead in the Doctor's Daughter to let that really sink in, because I don't think there was any point bringing it back apart from the fact that she's a big finish. That's it.
Yeah, because some people say, oh, but, you know, it's all right because the Doctor doesn't know. And I'd be like, no, but I'd argue it's more from, like, the audience perspective.
I know
because,
that
again,
she's
like,
alive.
she's a very likable character. And, you know, when she does get shot and dies and you get that whole reaction from Tennant, I'd argue it's very powerful. But then,
well, I mean,
just to do the whole...
It kind of goes back to that bigger issue I had with Day of the Doctor, where it's like, instead of the Doctor witnessing something die and having to live with that, it's a misunderstanding, and the Doctor thinks they're dead, but they're actually not.
This is it. I mean, I think in Moffat, who, like, in the whole 7 years he ran the show, it's like, I'm not saying you can't rescue characters at the last minute. You know, that is a sci-fi trope. Like, you can do it, and it can be done well. But if you do it consistently to a point that I think does happen in the Moffat era, it removes sort of a lot of the punch out of what death means in this show.
Yeah.
Like, I think, again, Russell, I've been watching the old Doctor Who Confidentials recently, and I think it's in the Dalek episode. One thing Russell says right out of the gate is, like, Doctor Who, in some respects, is about death. And I think Russell understood... Again, not obviously side characters die every episode or nearly every episode, but he understood when those big moments counted about someone dying. Mm-hmm. He understood, I think, what that would mean. Whereas, I think, as I said in last episode, either Moffat was too afraid to go all the way with it, or he was just, as you said, questing for, like, that lovely moment or the happy ever after, which, again, is fine on, like, the odd occasion, but it happens so often throughout the Smith and Capaldi eras.
I think it has to be earned, and that's something that I love. Like, for example, the Doctor Dances does that, but I think it does it perfectly, and it's like the people being resurrected and everybody living is actually really impactful because of what the Ninth Doctor's been through and what stories we got before that. And also, as a standalone story, all of the horror, the fact that it's set in World War II where people are dying all the time, I think that works really well. Whereas if you look at something like Knock Knock, it was just completely unnecessary and had no impact.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be my, like, one major gripe with it as well.
Yeah.
Aside from that, it's fun. Like, it's very much like Smile for me. Like, there's a lot of, it's just a very fun episode. Like, I think it's one of those, like, where I enjoy it the most when I can just I watch it without necessarily switching my brain on. That's not to say I don't analyze Doctor Who episodes. I do, but sometimes you know sometimes I don't want to have to rip it apart. Sometimes I just want to watch it for what it is. If it's fun, like there's loads of classic stories I watch that aren't perfect by any means, but you know, I love because of how much, like, the Invasion of Time. Like, the Invasion of Time is not a good story, you could argue, but I have a lot of fun just watching it.
There are stories that I actually do genuinely think are good, but in terms of the way I enjoy them, aren't, like, on a super intellectual level. Like, something like Planet of the Daleks, for example, is not a superly intellectual story, but I really enjoy watching it anyway. It's just an enjoyable watch. Same thing with something like The Chase, or you know, there's a whole bunch of stories that are like that. They're not like super duper high IQ stuff, but they're just fun. And Knock Knock and Smile are kind of like that. There is some intellectual value to it, but it's not superly over the top.
Yeah, I was surprised as well because this script's written by Mike Bartlett, who is he's quite a famous playwright here in the UK. He's written a lot of theatre, and going through drama school, I've read many of his plays, and a lot of them do have like I don't know what you call it, like a socio-political element to them, which is great. Like one, I think it's his, because I think the students above me did it in their third year, is a play called 13, which is sort of about a potential, like, sort of future dictatorship thing in the UK. You know, it's very political, basically, but it's very well written and it's very powerful. So when they announced that he was going to be writing for Doctor Who, I sort of thought, ooh, you know, what kind of thing are we going to get here? And as you said, there's arguably not a political stance in this, which is great. You know, I like the fact he just sort of clearly had fun writing a horror story.
Especially considering that the story before it and the story after it are very political. I think it was nice to have a bit of a break.
Yeah, exactly. And I just admire that from a writer's perspective. You know, that he clearly just, I can't remember if he said he was a Who fan beforehand, but no, you know, regardless of what it is, I like the fact he just had fun writing, you know, a horror story, I suppose.
I think we should move on to the next one.
Yeah, man, let's do it. Which is Oxygen.
Oxygen. Now, this is where we're talking. This is
This is the biggie.
This is the biggie for me. This is where I get this was the point when I first watched series 10, because I watched the first 4 episodes. I'm like, I'm really enjoying this. This is like, really fun, and it was sort of like a nice breath of fresh air from the last few years of Who. It was like sort of the fluffiest I'd felt in a while, and then we got Oxygen, which I think is fantastic. I love Oxygen.
It's got scary, atmospheric. It's a lot of impact. Yeah, it's just and this is this a Jamie Matheson script?
Yes, it is. It is Jamie Matheson, and he's back on mummy flatline form here, I think.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't, as we discussed, I wasn't a fan of the girl who died, but this one felt a lot more like his other ones, and this one is just, it's in space on a satellite in the middle of nowhere. The whole concept around, obviously it's based on capitalism, but it's done in the context of, you are on a spaceship stranded somewhere where you don't have enough, you would need resources to go anywhere else, and because the space station is owned by people who want to make profits, they make it that you have to buy oxygen. So essentially, to live, you have to spend money on other. You have to give your money.
Which
to
is
people.
A horrifying concept when you think about it.
It's very horrifying, and unfortunately, I hate to say this, it's something that could happen in like a few thousand years. And so, this is why, because I know there are a few people that don't like Oxygen. They think it's a bit heavy-handed, but I think that in Doctor Who, if you're going to have a heavy-handed political theme and have, the Doctor say it out loud, like it happens in this, it happens in the Pertwee all the time, it happens in a bunch of stories. If you're going to do that, you have to earn it. And I think this story absolutely earns it, because it actually shows you an example of what the story is trying to tell you. It shows it in full effect. It's really well written, so like the actual plot is really well constructed. Unlike something like Kill the Moon, there isn't lots of like issues with all the logistics of it. It's actually a really well written script, and really like when I ask questions about it, when I think about what's happening in it, I can actually piece together, the sort of the structure of what's happening in the story. And then you got the fact that it's so well written means that there's a lot of tension, because it means that if you can't afford oxygen, you will suffocate and die. And then it turns out that when these people run out of oxygen, they turn into these like walking sort of almost zombie-like creatures. They're like half forms, and they're being carried by these suits that are moving for them. So it's like a corpse being carried by a suit. Oh,
which is again a horrifying concept,
good.
like
So
a
good.
suit. Yeah,
so good. And on top of all the great direction, great music, great atmosphere, great performances. I love the side cast. There's like the Blue Man and all the other characters. They're all great. Bill is fantastic in this. I love the whole sequence of her almost dying, and it's so well.
Yeah.
It has one of my most favorite like edited sequences in the show, when Bill gets passed out, and then the Doctor sacrifices his own vision so that she can survive in the suit, which leads to one of my favorite parts of the series, is when the Doctor goes blind, but we'll get more into that later. But Capaldi is excellent in this story, and it's the first one where Nardole is actually really, really good, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's the first one really where he's been able to like properly get involved, isn't it?
Yeah. But this is just an all-round superb story. Like, this is one of the, when people talk about like, when I talk about when I think of Series 10 and why it ranks high in New Who for me, it's episodes like this that I point to, because I think Oxygen is absolutely spectacular.
No, it's sublime. It takes all the, like you said, the best elements of like being on a space station in the middle of nowhere, the zombie suits, the concept of selling oxygen, the Doctor going blind, which of course I remember when this aired, this was quite like a big deal, and especially for me as because I'm partially sighted myself, or visually impaired, whatever you want to call the term. So not completely blind, but I don't have the best vision. Let's put it that way. So to see the central hero of this show become blind was quite important to me in a way. Like, I felt quite impacted by this, and the fact that they obviously at the end revealed that he hasn't fixed it, he is still blind. I admired them for going with that, because
It's a great cliffhanger.
Yeah, and also like I'll be brief with this, but on a deeper level, like I feel disabilities in TV shows, it has gotten better, but I feel a lot of the time, especially in serialized shows like Doctor Who, they make a thing of like, oh, we'll have it in one episode, but we can't do it for longer than that, for whatever reason that might be.
I felt like Ryan Sinclair's dyspraxia was very underutilized.
No, absolutely, and I just admire them because I think in total, it's 3 episodes where he's blind, and I'm not saying he should have been blind for the whole series, but I just admire the fact that they took what is the Doctor essentially gains this disability of being blind, but they use it for a few episodes. They don't just shake it off and what I like, I mean, we'll get into it as we go further, but how the Doctor deals with blindness, I feel is very It's very relatable because it's a fear I have that might happen to me one day as I get older. That that the thing of having sight and then becoming blind, as opposed to say being blind from birth, is a very terrifying concept. I think like imagine seeing things and then it's just darkness. So yeah, the idea to make the Doctor blind I think is a bold one, but one that absolutely works and one that I have a lot of respect for them doing that.
Yeah, I mean,
and Oxygen is just great. So to bring it back to it,
one of my favorite 12th Doctor episodes. Honestly, I love it. I love Oxygen. So good. Yeah, I think the plot resolves in a really interesting way as well. It's just so well constructed and everything. I suppose if I were to nitpick, I think Nardol's like cheesy hug at the end is a bit cringe, but that's like one moment in a 45-minute lovely bit of sci-fi.
Lovely bit of TV, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it absolutely stands out.
I just want to emphasize again how much I love the idea of the actual suits that they have in the spaceship as well, and like the way that they show how they work at the start of the story. My god, it's just I could gush.
I think it's a good episode to show. Again, when I watched this with people who were getting back into Doctor Who, I think it's a good episode to show how horrifying the show can be, like how terrifying it can be. Because still, Doctor Who still has this odd reputation of it's not, it's wobbly sci-fi for kids or whatever. But I mean, when you look at Oxygen and what it's going for and what it does, it's just like episodes like The Empty Child or other things like that, or The Weeping Angels, and at least initially, that have traumatized people because they are genuinely horrifying concepts.
And also, I thought it was really cool how they used the blue man so that because how obviously Bill is a person of color. I thought it was really creative how they had a scene where she's accidentally racist to a blue man, and so now she knows what it feels like to be an attacker. Not obviously not on purpose. She's not intending to be racist to him.
Sure.
But because she's put in a scenario where she's like, oh well, that guy's blue. And then, he feels offended by that. I thought that was really interesting. A really interesting road to go down, where a character who's usually a victim of racism, you would imagine, is now seeing someone else being attacked by her words. I just thought that was fascinating.
No, yeah, it's an interesting sight, and arguably much better than it was. Is it in The End of Time with the cactus people when there's a "that's racist" line?
Oh yeah, although I think that was meant to be comedy.
Comedy, but yeah.
whether or not,
I get what you mean.
Whether or not it was funny is up to decide, but
yeah,
I think that was
subjective. But
yeah. I think that was
but
purely
it's a good idea.
I thought that was purely just a quirky line, whereas in Oxygen it was more actually sort of it was somewhat funny, but it was also testing Bill a bit, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah,
it kind of puts in perspective like how petty racism is in humanity when you compare to the fact that if it was aliens, it would be even more extreme.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just to tie it back to the whole capitalism thing, I know what you're saying about some people say, oh, it's too heavy-handed or whatever, but I think it actually deals with that notion in just, I guess, the right way for an audience, because, like I said, it does make you think, like, wow, could this one day... It's like some of the best like sci-fi or like drama concepts where they're dealing with things that aren't around yet, but are very much like but could this happen? Do you know what I mean? I think that's some of the And you know, I just think it handles it very well. I don't think it's heavy-handed, really.
And you have to put in perspective that the Doctor is a time traveler, so his interpretation of what capitalism is not the same as ours.
Sure, yeah.
No,
exactly.
I mean, he may be speaking on our level, but I have a funny feeling that when he says capitalism, he's thinking like thousands of years in the past and the future capitalism, not just like 2017 capitalism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and you can imagine, like, even, you know, people that are, like, for example, if there was a viewer of the show that was, you know, a fan of 2017 capitalism, for example, you could even say to them, well, that may be true, but think about, well, what if this was pushed to this limit where it was, you literally have to spend money to breathe? Would that be acceptable? And that's a really interesting question to ask. And I admire the balls to do that. I think that's what makes great stories like this, is having the balls to actually do something like this, to give an extreme example of where it could go in 1,000 years with the certain kinds of technology and the certain kind of people controlling that kind of technology. I think that makes it really interesting. And so I think some people need to put that in perspective, that it's not necessarily about 2017. It's more just a general theory. And I think that's what sci-fi is all about.
Yeah, for sure. It's about, like, it's on the conceptual level, isn't it? You know, about saying, and I think that's what Oxygen does really well. It's a bit like, I'm glad, it's good we're on the same page about it. I feel like I can't add that much more to it, though. Do you know what I mean? Because it is one of the highlights for definite out of Series 10.
I love it. So I suppose we can move on to another story that, for me personally, is a highlight, and is... I'm tossing up, but this episode, Extremis, if we're counting it as a single story and not thinking about the next 2 episodes, might be my favorite from Series 10. Possibly.
Okay.
It wasn't until my most recent viewing of it that I had this opinion, because the first time I watched it, I was like, I like that, but I was a bit confused. And then when I rewatched it a couple of years ago, I absolutely loved it. Wow.
It's funny you say that, because the whole, this trilogy, the Monk trilogy as it's called, like Extremis, again, like you, when I watched it, I was like, what's happened? What's going on? And then I remember I really liked Pyramid at the End of the World at the time. Yeah. And Lie of the Land, like a lot of people, I thought, oh, well, that happened then.
Exactly the same. I was exactly the same.
Yeah. But I rewatched them recently, and Extremis, certainly on a conceptual level and what it's going for, great. Like, I don't know what it is. I appreciated this episode a hell of a lot more than I did 4 years ago. Yeah. So I think this is actually my first... Is it my first? I think it's my first rewatch since broadcast, you know? So it's been 4 years. And yet, what it's aiming for, what it's going for is like really interesting. 95% of the dialogue is super tight in this. Yeah. Like you were saying about like the scene in the Oval Office where the 12th Doctor's explaining it, I think is
the Oval Office
great.
Scene is just it's the icing on the cake for that story. I love the way the story ends. I love the way that they use the Doctor's blindness, and they actually find a way to have me love the Sonic sunglasses for once. I was gobsmacked. I was like, oh my god, I actually like this thing that... Yeah. One of my least favorite things about Series 9 was those shades. I thought they were really cringe. But with Series 10, using them to their advantage when he went blind, I was just like, that's a stroke of genius. It's almost like it just fell into his lap that this happened. And it was so cool. And the whole thing of the simulation as well, the fact that an alien race would simulate an invasion before doing it to understand what the margin for error is such a beautiful idea. It shows intelligence, it shows preparation, it shows curiosity, it shows just trying to iron out all the issues that could possibly come with invasion so they can perfect it when they actually do it. It's something that's like never really been... I suppose you could say the android invasion is somewhat similar, but I think personally, I don't think the android invasion is executed particularly well, whereas I think Extremis takes that idea and does it just so well.
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, I love the analogy as well. Towards the end of that Oval Office scene, you know, the Super Mario analogy.
Yeah,
The whole he deletes himself from the game because he's sick of dying. Like that's again. I think it delivers what's going on in a very accessible way to people.
Yeah.
Because you know we all know what Super Mario is, and we can all gather behind that concept. And like and like I said before, I love how this episode and the next one deal with the Doctor's blindness, or how the Doctor deals with it. I think there's a line early on where he's got his hand on the vault and he says, "Oh, I can't let them know I'm blind." And then he says, "The memories are worse than the darkness." I thought that was a beautiful line. Because it's true. When you've got nothing to see, what you will see, if you've had experience of sight like the Doctor are your memories, what you have seen. And of course, being as we know what the Doctor's been through in his long life, and imagine, like, it makes you think, do you know what I mean? Like, what would he see? Like, what would he see? All like the horrible stuff from, like, say, the Time War, or all the people he's lost. And what I love is Moffat brilliantly, for once, doesn't have to like go into that anymore. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't have to then explain.
It's left up to the imagination of the viewer.
Yeah, it's just much more. It's much more powerful him just saying that and then leaving that idea with the audience, because I must have missed that the first time around, because I heard it on my rewatch and I was like, fuck. I was like, that is, you know, as I said, for someone who potentially, like myself, might lose my sight one day as I'm a lot older, it's a line to think about, you know, like that's, you know, it makes you think, damn, what will I think about, you know? So it's, I love how he goes about it in this episode. And some people say, oh, why doesn't he just tell Bill that he's blind? Like, as someone who, again, I'll make it clear, I'm not blind, but I have had visual impairment all my life. Like, when you experience it and when you learn about what, like, how in society it is, you know, it's viewed, or disability is viewed, it is perfectly natural to feel very closed about it. Like, I would go, you know, through friend groups for years, or, you know, even in school, I wouldn't like to, if I was sat at the back of the class, you know, I wouldn't want to make a fuss about, oh, can I sit nearer to see, you know, the board or anything, because of how I felt about what I had, if that makes sense. And you don't want to tell people. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. If anyone's listening, you should absolutely, if you feel you can, be open with any disability you have, and know that, you know, your friends should be there to support you and your family, etc. But no, I never had that problem with how the Doctor goes about it. I always thought it was quite natural and quite valid.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you think?
Very well handled. For me, like, this episode, Extremis, even though technically it's not actually the Doctor, this is like peak 12th Doctor for me. I love everything about the way he's characterized in this story, from, like you said, from the very relatable and almost fearsome blindness, but also just the insightful dialogue, the way he breaks down the plot, the fact that he's on the back foot because he's blind, and he has more of a challenge to work out what's happening. And then, obviously, there's the whole other subplot where the arbitrary story arc of the series gets absolutely flipped on its head, because for the first 5 episodes it was, oh, there's a vault, and it's a bit like, you know, it's like, oh, well, we've seen this before, you know, 10 times in New Who. We've seen these arcs before. Hey ho, you know, what's going to be this time? And then I love the way how in this episode the vault transforms into a character, and obviously it's one that we've already seen before. It's Missy, but I really like how halfway through this season the arbitrary story arc transforms into something completely different, and I think that's a really nice twist. Yeah.
Do you remember people at the time were like really bummed it was Missy? I loved it, even at the time. Like, and when they explained in Extremis why she was in there, like, the, you know, the whole ceremony and her about being good, I love that concept. I never had a problem with it. I like how instead of it just being like a sort of, you know, and obviously there are reveal moments that are great. I think Russell T Davies was great with, like, the story arc reveals. He was fantastic with that. But that's something that I loved about Extremis, is that rather than having just one moment where it's like, I am the master, for example, instead they just took their time with this subplot and explained how it happened deliberately. And so what it also does is it gives context for
what happened before Series 10 in those years between Husbands of River Song and the pilot.
Yeah.
And also, I suppose, Return of Dark Mysterio is part of that too. But it just gave some really nice context for what happened before he met Bill and why she's in the vault. And I just, it was so cool. And I love the whole setting of like him going out on that boat to see the execution, and then through a very clever, decoding of this puzzle, finds a way to have her be imprisoned by him rather than her be executed, which is, again, shows the Doctor's compassion to, stop the Master from dying, despite what she's done. And I think that act of the Doctor saving her life is part of what really, kickstarts that whole thing of Missy trying to, redeem herself to sort of pay him back positive, if that makes sense. So that is a nice deed that's done in that regard. Although, to be fair, the Doctor has saved the Master's life before. But then again, you could
several times,
and also the Master did save the Doctor's life in a time too. But getting back to the story a bit more, I really like that subplot. I know some people thought it was a bit jarring to jump in between, but I think on the second viewing, it's a lot more clear to me. I think it just took that second viewing to really piece it all together. And then there's everything else. I love Bill and Nardole. I love the whole thing of, I have the authority to kick your ass. I thought that was really funny.
Nardole is such a fun character. Like, do you remember how, like, when they announced him, everyone was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe they're bringing this character into the show." And now everyone loves Nardole.
Yeah, and I love the whole surprise of the Pope just turning up at Bill's house when she's on a date. I thought that was funny.
And again, like, we've seen it before, but I felt for Bill. How you would be pissed off if your date's ruined, especially in a way like that. I know it doesn't get much after that, but yeah, her outrage is justified. And
then the whole thing at the Veritas as well. I loved that. It's a book to find out the answers to this code, but of course the Doctor can't read because he's blind, so he has to find a way to do it, and he has to sort of he almost does like some like really high-tech braille, if that makes sense. It's like
the Time Lord reading aid, as he calls it. Yeah,
he like scans the book and reads it through his blind eyes. It's such a good story, and I love the reveal of when Bill and Nardole go into all those different rooms. Like, there's that really dark moment where there's all those people drinking and there's bombs under the table because they've gone insane because they've realized what the truth is, and the whole reveal of like when they say pick a random number and everyone in the room says the same number. It's just it's very dark and very clever, and it's exactly the kind of thing that I love in Doctor Who, and especially from Stephen Moffat. Like, I don't know how much of a controversial take this is, but Extremis is honestly one of my favorite Moffat scripts for Doctor Who.
Wow. Do you know what? I think if more people, like we said, maybe watched it again, it'd be interesting to see how many opinions
I just think because it's tied directly to the next two episodes, it has a bit of a stink on it. But I think as a self-contained story and a setup for the next two episodes, it's absolutely brilliant. I love it. Love Extremis.
Yeah. Go and watch Extremis again, folks. Because a lot of people, again, when we watched it at the time, didn't like it. So I would be curious to see where opinion sits now.
Yeah.
Which is funny going into the next one, Pyramid at the End of the World, because I would say this is the one where my opinions have changed the least.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I just wanted to make a mention that I really like the whole thing of the whole point of the simulation is so that the monks would be super, super prepared for their invasion, right? But something that I love about it is that the Doctor, because he emailed all the information to the actual Doctor, now the Doctor is prepared for it as well. And so there's like a two-sided coin, and that sets up for when the Doctor takes charge in Pyramid, because he already knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, so Pyramid at the End of the World, out of the three parts, it was the one I enjoyed the most at the time. I mean, I still very much feel that way now. It has some of the fun elements as the earlier episodes, I think, that we discussed, like Smile and Knock Knock, but it also continues this threat, and I love the building threat of the monks, because at this point they're still very unknown to us, like, who they are, their powers and stuff, and I like the sort of building menace of it and the rising tension of it. Like, I think all the stuff with the military generals is great.
I love how they exploit a human flaw in the sense of, like, there's the lab explosion. There's scientists in there that are testing, and because of a fault that ends up leaking, and that ends up exploding the lab eventually and causing a lot of issues. But I like how they exploited that human fault because they used the simulation first, and then they realized that humans have this ability to mess up in these really dangerous environments, and so they use that as part of to exploit them and put them under pressure, and it puts the Doctor massively under pressure because he wants to try and help them, but then he's backed into a corner by the sort of the airlock. And so I thought that was a really lovely bit of side plot to add to the story on top of everything else with the pyramid and the monks and I love the implementation of the doomsday clock element as well. I thought that was a great metaphor because we are, I think it's fair to say as humans we are constantly afraid of our own destruction, or like our selfish. And I think the decisions that are made by the humans, like particularly the generals in this, are very, again, it's like what we were saying about the elements of oxygen. Like, it's like, oh, could this if this was ever a thing, would this happen? Yeah. But again, like, I think as the monks say, they act out of fear. I do think that one thing I will say is I think realistically, I think there should have been a bit more development around the world leaders of the armies in terms of uniting together, because I think in a realistic scenario, I think it would be a much bigger struggle to actually get them to unite together.
Of course, yeah. I guess I sort of forgave it because I guess I sort of, told myself this is one 45-minute episode in 3. We're probably not going to see these characters again. So I do see what you mean, but from the purpose of like, confines, I think in my head I just let it slide a little bit and was like, oh yeah, I guess they all bounded together. But I do see what you mean completely. Yeah, it would be if this was real, it would be much more of a struggle to get everyone to agree.
And the other thing that I really loved about this episode was the very end, in the sense of healing the Doctor's blindness. I think there's some parts of that are like questionable, as of what kind of powers do the monks have to heal that blindness. However, one thing I did love is that Bill and the Doctor had a conflict where the Doctor was telling her not to consent to the monks, but she chose to do it anyway because she wanted to save him, because she figured out that he's one of the only people that she knows, and probably the only person that she knows that can actually get them out of this situation. And so she made the choice to consent to the monks in hope that he would help get them out of it once they were in control.
Yeah, and I love the fact, I just love that final conundrum, the fact that the Doctor can't get out because he can't see that. Again, it's I just love that setup. He's got all the tech in the world, but he still can't see the numbers. And like Bill's sacrifice, I feel is completely justified. And I think it's even more justified considering that Bill knows that part of the reason why the Doctor's blind is because of her. Not in a bad way, but the Doctor chose to make that sacrifice for her. So it feels justified because it feels like she's making the same, or a similar sacrifice for him. Yeah. No, it's a great way to finish it off.
Yeah, I do think that on the whole, though, I wouldn't say Pyramid's a particularly great story, just because I think, like, we've already talked about the highlights of it, and the highlights are really, really good. I do think, though, there is a bit of... Some of the in-between stuff doesn't hit for me as hard. Like, it's a little bit... And also, I think there's a weird bit at the start where it's one of those, like, I think I could be wrong on this, but I believe it's the 12th Doctor in the TARDIS. And he does the whole, like, sort of what is the meaning of life thing at the start of it.
Oh, he has, like, a little soliloquy, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we needed that, to be honest.
I mean, it seems like it was mainly plot armor for, oh, they can move the TARDIS whilst he's in it. But yeah, did we need a speech to convey that? Arguably not, because we sort of had the existential thing about, life and his blindness in Extremis. But yeah, no, I think Pyramid of World, I think as a middle part of a trilogy, I still think Pyramid of At the End of the World, in my opinion, still works. Like, it builds on...
I'd say it's good. I'd say it's a good story.
Yeah.
I still think that it still has some of that... I don't know if padding's the right word, because I don't think it's padding. But there is just... For me, personally, there is something about... And it's the same with the Zygon two-parter, and it's the same with Kill the Moon as well. I feel like Peter Harness isn't particularly strong when it comes to the interlinking scenes. Like a lot of his dialogue scenes are a bit flat for me.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
the only scenes that really hit properly in the Pyramid in the World are like the highlights, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair.
But there's a bunch of faffing around in Pyramid where it's a bit like, oh, the momentum's sort of drying out a bit. Having said that, it's probably my favorite Peter Harness episode. Unfortunately for me, that's not a particularly high bar. But I like Pyramid. I think it's good. I think it's really solid. Though having said that, it's not as exciting in retrospect because of how I feel about the final part.
Yes,
the Lie of the
Land,
which is written by Toby Whithouse, who is like one of my favorite New Who writers. Like we were talking about Series 9, we talked about Under the Lake Before the Flood, which is a phenomenal story. You know, I always go on about like School Reunion and the God Complex and A Town Called Mercy. They're great episodes that I love. And then I'm like, okay, so, you know, surely Toby Whithouse, like, what, you know, he'll do a good job. And the whole idea of the monks controlling the society and everyone believing that they were always there is really interesting. And it's got a really cool, like, atmosphere to it. And I think it allows Pearl Mackie to give one of her best performances in the show because she's at a very intense point. And there's this whole build up around the fact of, I love the fact that we've already established that Bill's very different, and the fact that she would be willing to shoot the Doctor if it meant saving the people. I thought that was such an interesting way to go about it. But then it's not that. It's a fake out regeneration.
Yeah, I feel the first half of this episode is really, really good. Yeah. Or like the first chunk.
Yeah.
And then
it's as soon as the fake out regeneration happens, that's when it starts to spiral, I think.
Yeah, and I will say what I loved is the whole thing about Bill trying to find the Doctor very much it gave me vibes of the whole, you know, Martha at the end of Series 3, like her year quest. Yeah. It gave me those in a good way, you know, in a good way. Because I love seeing how, as you said, Pearl Mackie, this is arguably one of, if not her best performance in the series. Yeah. Like her acting stellar.
I think maybe the Doctor Falls might be
that might clinch it, actually.
Slight notch better, but it depends.
Yeah. But I just love how you see the length she's determined to go to just to even find him. And then, you know, the first half of that scene when she does find him, the way she portrays Bill's betrayal, I think, is brilliant. Like, it's not like like we talked about Sutcliffe snapping earlier. It's not like a snap 0 to 100. It's a very gradual realization in her mind that the Doctor has betrayed her, and that's heartbreaking. And you see that, on full force, and with how cold the Doctor is being. Like, it's a brilliant scene. Like, the two of them acting it is brilliant. And like you said, the concept of Bill going to the lengths of shooting down the Doctor just to save the people, because there's no hope left. And then, as you say, you have the the fake out regeneration that was put in all the teaser trailers and all the promotion. And let's talk about that.
It's just, for me, like, I get why it's trying to be a funny twist, but it's just not worth it. Like,
it almost feels like it comes at the worst time, though. Like, of all the places to put a funny twist, and you put it here.
I know.
Like,
I know, it was
like,
so...
after all that build as well, after the Doctor's basically said "fuck you" like to Bill's face and said, "I'm siding with the monks." Like, after all that, like, I'm fine with the idea of the Doctor needing to, like, test her to make sure she's not under the influence or whatever. But if you were gonna do that, either set it up in a different way, or, I mean, the whole fake out regen, it's so. And people say, oh, you know, well, since Capaldi took over, you know, there's a question as to how many regenerations the Doctor has. Maybe he's got unlimited.
I also think that they should have capitalized on the fact that he put Bill through that much trauma and then laughed it off.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like she should have been a lot harder on him for that. Like, that is quite a big thing to do to your friend.
it's an emotional manipulation to the
Yeah.
to the max, really.
And I think,
like, obviously,
I think that's part of it, because obviously we'll get to the ending, which has its own issues. But one of my biggest issues with the ending is that she doesn't have any ill will towards that. She just forgets about it, and I think that's a really big missed opportunity for some really strong character drama, is to have Bill, despite the fact that the plot gets resolved, still be a bit like, well, I still remember what you did to me.
Yeah, it feels, as opposed to, again, just because it's popping in my head, say Martha, when she left the Doctor, that was partly based on everything she'd gone through in the series, not just from the misunderstanding, but everything else. And it worked because you believed it.
Yeah.
Whereas you say, it's sort of like, oh, you pass. Like, I do understand, like, Bill would probably be relieved, to learn that the Doctor isn't working for the monks. But I think that relief would be very quickly overshadowed by the, holy fuck, you emotionally manipulated me to the point where I shot you. Yeah. Like, regardless whether it's blanks or not. But then it also raises the question, like, can the Doctor just, like, trigger his own regeneration then? And, like, doesn't it hurt based on everything it's all these questions that just get, and it's ironic, really. The Doctor says to Nardole, oh, regeneration a bit much, and he goes no, and I'm like, yeah, kind of.
Yeah,
like,
I know. I think
the audience probably thinking, maybe.
Is, like, the show kind of sometimes just makes up the rules as it goes along. And to be completely fair, it's not just a Moffat thing. Other people did it as well. But,
absolutely, yeah.
But it's just a weird thing where the show kind of just makes up the rules as it goes, and I don't think it works very well. Sometimes.
Yeah, and I know some people link it back to, Romana in Destiny of the Daleks, when she can seemingly just keep changing despite there being no damage. And, like, okay, yeah, if the Doctor can but it's just the fact that for so long, especially if you're talking about just the Doctor's case, we've only experienced regeneration as a concept, that happens when in mortal danger, as opposed to just something he can trigger sort of at will, almost. Well, he siphoned off regeneration energy for various things, like in Rise of the Cybermen with that part of the TARDIS,
and like Age of
or in
Manhattan
the Witch's Familiar. Yeah, or Witch's Familiar when he siphons it into Davros's thing. But I've always seen that as different than a full-blown regeneration. But yeah, it's just, I think we're both in agreement, like a lot of people, that it's you can have it's the wrong twist for the occasion.
Yeah, it's
like,
it's a really cheap party trick, and also, like, wouldn't Bill, like, ask him what the hell that was that came out of his body?
Yeah, like, what just happened? Yeah, because as far as we know, it hasn't been brought up yet, has it? So,
and also, like, just thinking about, like, as an alternative, like, timeline, like, imagine what would have happened if Bill had shot the Doctor for real and this wasn't a test, and then the Doctor regenerated into another person. And
they even sort of tease that, the one soldier who didn't replace his ammo with blanks. And it's like, well, yeah, what if he'd have done it? Like, what then? So yeah, it's just, again, and we, like, well, at the minute, I don't think we know whether, if this was all of, because it's just a Toby Whithouse credit. I don't know if this was all his idea or if this was a Moffat pulling his, a head writer strings or whatever. But it's just, whoever's decision it was, I don't know what they were thinking at the planning stage, but it just doesn't work.
I know
that really.
I know that during Pyramid at the End of the World, Moffat's mother passed away, so he wasn't as as involved in that script as he usually is.
Okay.
And then this one maybe even less so, which is why he probably wasn't even credited for it.
That's fair enough, and I'm not trying to take that away from him whatsoever, but I just feel like whoever's decision it was to go with this, it just does, like, as you said, the way it translates on screen, the sharp the twist in tone for comedy, the fact that Bill doesn't hold anything against him for it, despite the fact in her mind she just shot him. She pointed a gun at him and shot him. Yeah, it's just it's rubbed off way too quick. But I mean, with the rest of the episode, I kind of what do you think of, like, the whole? Because I guess the other big talking point is the ending, like the how it's all resolved.
So I have things to say about this. So
okay.
I usually describe Lie the Land as, this is what people think Last of the Time Lords is. If you get what I'm saying? When people rag on Last of the Time Lords for being a reset button, it annoys me because there's a lot more context as to why it's a reset button, and there's a lot of things that people ignore about that story. And I often have to come to the story's defense because I love Last of the Time Lords. But this one, Lie the Land, is pretty much exactly what people think Last of the Time Lords is, if you get what I'm saying. Like this is the point where it's like, no, it's actually just a reset button, and there's no context to support it. It's just a reset button, and that's all it is. It's just Bill's love for her mother overpowers the monks, and then they fly away on their pyramid, and then everyone forgets, and then it's happily ever after, no consequences. And I think it's kind of shit, to be honest.
Yeah, it's sort of like the thing they defeat the aliens with love. It's like, it reminds me of, like Closing Time in Series 6 when Craig, and, I'm not, the whole thing of defeating X with love, like, I don't have a problem with that in concept. Like, I think that idea has potential, even cliche as it is, I think it has potential for storytelling. I like it to an extent where, because obviously with Bill's mother, we know that she doesn't really know her.
Yes,
so
of course.
The idea that she's, and obviously it's the Doctor's kind act that has helped this. Like, I like that aspect, but yes, the quick resolution, the no consequences thing, I just think, and again, you could argue, is this the constraint of a 45-minute episode? But then again, it's just like, you could have trimmed out other bits to elaborate on it more.
Yeah, I think the issue here is that I don't have an issue with Bill having sentiment towards her mother at all. I think that's very natural for someone who doesn't know their own mother. I think the issue is that using that as a resolution in the context of the Lie of the Land isn't earned, and it doesn't really make sense. That's the issue I have.
Sure. That's fair. It just results in a very disappointing conclusion to the first two parts, especially on retrospect, that I still really enjoyed.
Yes, and I think for me personally, that specific, is it earned? Is there context for what happens? Does it make sense? Blah blah blah. For me, that's what's different about this one compared to when it's been done in other stories like Last of the Time Lords. Is I can't actually. It's a bit like what we were saying in the Series 9 one, how we were talking about like Hellbent versus the Waters of Mars, how like one story I can tell you why the Doctor becomes the Time Lord victorious, whereas with Hellbent I can't really tell you without your headcanon why he becomes the hybrid.
Yes.
And it's like, it's the same thing here where it's like, I could tell you why there's a reset button in Last of the Time Lords and what purpose that has, whereas with Lie of the Land I can't tell you why it happens and what purpose it has. It just, to me, it's a blank, and it's just a disappointing ending, and that's for me the biggest difference, is that in concept a reset button isn't necessarily bad in my opinion, but you have to do it in a way that makes sense, is earned, and has a purpose, and I don't think Lie of the Land does that very well.
No, it doesn't, and it is a shame, and especially when there are some promising bits near the start, like we said, like the build to that scene with Bill and the Doctor, and like the first half of it before the fake out, I think is great. It reminded me in a way of talking about like the lengths people are willing to go. That it's sort of a similar fake out scene, but a bit different. In Dark Water, when Clara with the TARDIS keys, it gave me that sort of vibe, which I liked. I think, again, we seem to be in agreement that it doesn't really resolve this interesting story in a satisfying way, which is a shame. And I would be curious, because, they're novelizing the modern stories at the minute, the Target books. If they ever did these three, I would love and hope, that the Lie of the Land one would expand on it a bit more.
Oh, yeah, and also because this is such an interesting idea, and I feel like there is quite a bit of faffing around in this episode. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of just walking around doing not much. When you had so much to explore with that idea. Like, there's so much you could have done. And it's a shame because this Monk trilogy starts with one of my favorite Capaldi episodes, Extremis, and it ends with one of my least favorites, Lie of the Land.
Yeah, a lot of people say that, but
it's
just a shame. It's a victim of many things. It's a victim of its length. It's a victim of the twist. I mean, I know we keep harping on about it, but for anyone who hasn't watched it in a while, just go and watch it again. And as soon as that twist happens, it changes things so much. I think we agree on that. Like,
because I know a lot of people just say the Monk trilogy as a whole isn't very good, but I actually think there's a couple of things in Pyramid that I'm a little bit iffy on, but on the whole, it's really solid until that twist.
Yes. Yeah. So like 2.5 of it is great. And then as soon as that happens, it's like, oh.
But the whole three-parter is just killed by the fake regeneration and the resolution at the end. It's such a shame.
And it wouldn't have been as bad either if the fake regeneration hadn't been hyped in like trailers and stuff, with like no context. Because now, as we were going through Series 10, we were like, oh, that clip of him, is that from the finale? Is that from, whatever it, because we knew this was Capaldi's last one.
Yeah.
And then when it happens, you're just sort of like, oh, you basically baited us, like, for nothing.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just, It was mistimed, misjudged, whatever you want to call it. It just...
But I will say, I think it was, for me, the pilot to the pyramid at the end of the world and a bit of Lie of the Land was like the longest consistent run of episodes I liked in a long time. So I do have to give my hats off to that.
Nice.
I thought it was a very consistent run, and Lie of the Land was the first point in Series 10 where I'm like, here we go. It's like my first dud, which is it's a real shame because it was on such a good, rolling ball.
I would argue the ball gets picked back up a little bit with the next one, which is Empress of Mars. I don't actually have. It's weird. I like it. I don't weirdly have too much to say on it. It's very much in the vein of, like we were saying about Smile and Knock Knock. Like it's just fun. It's a fun episode. It's the Ice Warriors on Mars. You've got
Empress of Mars is kind of a soft prequel to Curse of Peladon, right?
I mean, you get like Alpha Centauri at the end as well, which was cute. I must admit, that was really cute. That made me smile. Yeah. But part of me like, and I'm not trying to sound like, oh, but classic's better, but like, I think in my heart of hearts, like, I think like a lot of us, I know it's been done in Big Finish, I think, but I would have loved to have seen a third TV Peladon story. I thought that would have been really cool.
Especially with the 12th Doctor as well.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like so much older and like whether
actually seeing
further down Peladon.
Actually seeing Alpha Centauri as a character in New Who would have been so cool.
Yeah, but it was so curious how they did that. But
imagine if they had like because you know how they had David Troughton in Curse. Like, what if they had like, I don't know, like Harry Melling in this one? That would have been interesting.
Yeah, pass that down. But yeah, I mean, like it's not bad. I don't think it's Mark Gattis's best script for the show.
I put Unquiet Dead over this one, and probably Robot of Sherwood as well.
Yeah, I just think it. Like we said, it's just fun. It's a fun little. Yeah. It's a fun little space romp.
Yeah,
really, and it works.
I can see it's a very snuggly episode, which is why I can see Will Maddox loves it so much. It's because it's obviously you've got like you got like the Ice Queen, and you got the classic capture and escape motif, and you got a bunch of historical characters mixed in with these Ice Warriors who the design's great. I love the design. There's also the really cool thing of like there's that gun that turns people into boxes. I thought that was really cool. And there's a bunch of like really funny references as well. Like, I think there's references to like films in it as well. And I love it whenever Bill brings up like a modern pop culture reference and the Doctor's just like bemused by it.
Yeah, he's like, what?
Yeah.
No, it's really sweet,
But yeah. I mean, it is. It really is just a sort of sweet episode, really. And I love the costumes again. I love the whole like the spacesuits they wear. I love the aesthetic of it. It's very stylish. The bit at the start's maybe a little bit smug, but I can get over that.
Yeah, I think like we said with these other episodes of Series 10, it was like you said, they're not necessarily, I don't want to say ambitious because that sounds cruel.
They're not complex and complicated, if you know what I mean.
I suppose, but I'd argue that's not necessarily to its detriment because they do work really well as fairly straightforward, fun adventure stories. So
well, I mean, it's kind of like I think you've described it before that Series 10 is kind of like what Series 7 should have been like, where you've got rather than it being these weird sort of like Hollywood posters turned into 45-minute episodes. It's more like you just take classic style concepts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And just have adventures, You can have like an overarching thing, like obviously you've got Missy in there and all that sort of stuff, but like I like that they can just have adventures where
I think this is the thing is that I think Series 10 rides a very good line because a lot of New Who is very intense, like especially dramatically and character wise. It's very intense to watch, especially early on. And then I also find personally the Chibnall era is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's the intensity, especially Series 11, the intensity is so low that it becomes almost not actually that engaging to watch. It's quite it's quite flaccid. Whereas I feel like Series 10, it rides this really good line of being not so intense that it's this really ripping character drama like other series are, but it's also got enough energy to just be fun. And it's a sort of like, it's chill, but it's not boring.
It's why I think a lot of people take comfort in Series 10, because I think if you want to watch some New Who, particularly some Capaldi New Who, where things aren't always intense, and don't get me wrong, I like that. That's why I love Series 8 so much. But like, I think, I think if you want that sort of comfort food story that isn't as intense, like there's so many, like I've said, Smile, Knock Knock, Empress of Mars, like there's so many episodes you can zip to for that.
There's quite a few episodes in Series 4 that is like this as well, that a lot of people jump to. Like you think about pretty much anything from like Partners in Crime to Unicorn and the Wasp is kind of comfort food. Is a bit like that.
Yeah, I think so. That's certainly the vibe I'd describe it as anyway. And I know some people say to me like, oh, comfort food means you just, you just like it, you don't analyze it. I'm like, well, no, like you can analyze it, but I get more out of it just watching it and having fun.
Well, I think there's still like, you can still have writing standards even if it's not complex. You can still construct really well-written TV even if you're not doing something that's super ambitious. Like you think about, I mean, okay, this is going to sound strange because it's not really what I'm saying, but if you look at Season 7, Spearhead from Space is a lot more simple than the other 3 stories, but it's still incredible because of how it's done, because of how it's executed, how it's written, how it's acted, how it's directed, how it's scored, etc. The execution of that idea is done so well that it brings it up to being as good as the rest of the season, despite the fact that it's not as complex as something like the Silurians or the Ambassadors of Death or Inferno.
Yeah. No, I get that completely.
Yeah.
And it's just nice. Like Empress of Mars is just nice, and oddly though, the Eaters of Light, which is the next one, takes a bit of a dip for me, which is odd because. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of people were disappointed because it's by Rona Munro, who did Survival.
Yeah, I do think it was a victim of pre-hype. Which is, it gets all of us sometimes, doesn't it? You see, it's a like classic Who writer. That means it's going to be either like Survival or it's going to be incredible or whatever, So, but Rona Munro, again, she's also a playwright. I've read many of her plays. She's a very talented writer, and like again, the idea of the Eaters of Light I liked, but I don't know. There was just something about this one, like the fun element that is in those other episodes we talked about, just doesn't feel as present. It's not as like jubilant as the others.
Yeah, I think Capaldi kind of goes back to his like Series 8 persona in this one. Actually, to be fair, I think I mentioned this maybe in the last video, maybe the one before that. That for me is part of what is a saving grace of this story. I think Capaldi's performance is really good in this story. I really like the scene where he brings the kids together and kind of encourages them and points them in the right direction. I think that's really good, and some of his snide comments are funny too. So I do think he's one of the highlights, but I get what you're saying. It's not.
Yeah,
it's not the best, is it?
I'd argue it's the most. I'm even above Lie of the Land. I'd say this is the most forgettable story of Series 10. It's not. It's I don't like using the word bad unless I really mean it. I wouldn't go as far to say it's a bad episode because I don't feel like it is. It's just very. It just, for me at least, it felt very lackluster, I think is a good word.
Yeah.
Not saying it has to be filled to the brim with everything, but even the most like simplistic or like bare bones Doctor Who stories, or most of them for me, still have that really fun element, that very watchable element. Yeah. And the Eaters of Light was just one where it keeps dipping in and out for me. There's like little moments that I'm like, this is really fun, this is really great.
It's part of it is obviously the production is quite dark, so it's kind of hard to see sometimes, especially if you're in a sunny room. I found that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the pacing is quite jagged, and it can be a bit of an upsetting watch. Like it's not the most polished script, so it can be a bit odd, and like the story ends quite soon. It's quite a short episode, and it's just not. It's not fine tuned. It's certainly not anywhere as good as Survival, in my opinion. But it's a weird one. It is a lie. I don't really have much to say because I don't hate it, but I also don't really like it either. It's just a sort of oddity that exists.
Well, that's it. I don't have much, and of course, I feel it sort of suffers a bit because it comes right before the 2-part finale.
Yeah.
Which of course, and I think this happens a lot in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Where like I'm doing my viewing figures
I mean,
series at the.
This happened with Sleep No More, and it also happened with In the Forest of the Night, and like it happened with Fear Her, and it happened with It happened
in Classic Who as well, because I'm going through my viewing figure series at the minute.
Even though personally I like the Space Pirates, it is an unpopular story, and it's the second to last of season 6. And
but even stories in the middle, like I often find, what am I trying to think? Like, like the Face of Evil, Leela's introduction. Like, it's a good story, but I feel it often gets so overlooked because it's sandwiched between the Deadly Assassin and the Robots of Death.
Yeah.
Or like the Android Invasion, sandwiched between Pyramids of Mars and the Brain of Morbius. Like, I feel when stories get sandwiched between things like that and they aren't as like popular or good, if you want to call it that.
I think like I was saying before, like Planet of the Daleks sticks out like a sore thumb in season 10, especially coming after Frontier in Space and before the Green Death, and especially because considering you got like the 3 Doctors in Carnival Monsters as well. It's just
that's funny. I've not heard that opinion. Most people say it's Frontier in Space that's the odd one out. I mean, I disagree to that notion, but most people would say that. So.
I would fight them on that because I think Frontier in Space is an absolutely exceptional story, and clearly people don't understand the fine art of people being in prison for 2 episodes.
Maybe that could be another discussion for another time because I like Frontier in Space too.
I have plenty of Pertwee opinions. I love Pertwee's era.
But yeah, this one does suffer from that, but also just I think it doesn't help the fact that, again, for me at least, it's not that engaging. I'd argue it's like, even though I chided Sleep No More, like at least I remember Sleep No More just because it had like a gimmick, and I know that isn't by no means a good reason to remember a story just because it had a gimmick, but I do remember it more than I do this. And maybe I need to rewatch it again, and maybe I'll have a different opinion, but as it stands, from what I remember of it, like I just don't. It's not one I dash to rewatch.
It's very mediocre. There's also one other thing that I haven't brought up yet, but I think it's at its worst here. There's one thing about this series that I don't think was executed that well, and that's I think every time they bring up Bill's sexuality, they don't really change it up a bit. It's very repetitive. Like, in every episode, it's just someone flirts with her and she says, oh no, I'm not interested in men, I'm interested in women, right? And because Eaters of Light is, like, the last one, and it's been done so many times at this point, I think it probably suffers the most because it's been done so many times before this point. And so when they do it here, it's just like, oh, are we doing this again? And it's just like, again, I don't have a problem with that idea and concept, but the fact that they don't change how the scene is done every time they do it. They just have the same scenario play out every episode. It just becomes tiresome for me.
No, I get that. It's just the similar, and it would have been nice to see them take it in different directions, but we got what we got. So
I mean, because when because they do a similar thing in series 4 with like the Doctor and Donna, where it's like, oh no, we're not married, but every time they do it, it still feels fresh because they do it in a slightly different way. If you get what I'm saying. They do it in Pfizer Pompeii, they do it in Planet the U, and they do it in Unicorn and the Wasp. And it's just ever so slightly, the performances and the way it's written, it's just ever so slightly altered how they get to it. And so by doing that, it makes it fun each time you see it. Whereas with Bill, we get it quite a few times, and by the time we get to Eaters of Light, it's just like, ugh, I've seen this before.
Yeah.
I think that is a blemish on Bill. Like, it's not like a big problem.
No, not at all. And I mean, at least we're going into World Enough and Time, which is wildly different to the Eaters of Light.
yeah. So, okay, World Enough and Time. I think I should talk about this one. So,
go for it.
I actually did a reaction to the noir version of this that Ace Creeper made on this channel.
Yeah.
And so because I was really interested to see it. On that viewing, it got me thinking about the story a bit, because when I first watched it, I really, really liked it. But I had a few, like, little things about it, like, there's something about this that I can't quite put my finger on, but it's not clicking the right way. And I thought at the time that it might just be the fact that I was spoiled that the Mondasian Cybermen and John Sim were going to be in it. And I think that was true for everyone who knew at the time. But having said that, looking back on it, the Mondasian Cybermen and John Sim's master twist is actually really, really well done, especially considering I've seen people react to that episode who'd never seen it before, and seeing them react to it, I'm like, okay, yes, in universe, that element of it is really well done. And so when I rewatched it on the channel for the noir version with my friend Callum, I was going into it thinking, like, I know I really like this episode, and I know the parts that I will love. But I was thinking, I'm like, am I going to find exactly what it was that I couldn't put my finger on? Because I was intrigued to see if that would happen. And so basically, I'm sure we'll get into what we love about it, because obviously it is a great episode. Like, the Cybermen are done about as good as they have ever been on TV. Like, I have absolutely no criticisms of the Cybermen. Like, they are absolutely perfect. John Simmer's Razor, again, brilliant. Love that. Love his chemistry with Bill. The whole concept of time with the black hole on the spaceship, I love that too. And I love the direction by Rachel Talalay and the score by Murray Gold, and just, it's a great story. So,
yeah.
The reason why I'm slightly iffy on it, just at the edges, and why I think I might prefer Extremis in terms of Series 10 episodes, there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, I wish we had gotten more development of the people that were outside of Bill, so like the people that were also part of the system. You know, we saw glimpses of them when she was walking through the street in the windows. But if we had gotten more development of those characters, then it would have meant a lot more when they went to war in the next episode in the Doctor Falls, I think. That was one thing that I wish we got more of. And the other thing is, I think it would have been better if Bill's reaction to being down there for so many years had actually developed her character more. Because I personally find the fact that she's almost exactly the same, you know, like 10 years she's down there? I find the fact that she's almost exactly the same person, having been down there for 10 years, a little bit disappointing. And I think there was a lot more you could have done with using that time period to really develop her, and you could have done it in quite horrific ways, actually. But I think the fact that she's just quite chill for those 10 years, firstly, I know that she is a very resilient person and doesn't change much because she's not influenced, which I get. But I did find it a little bit hard to believe, and I also think it's a missed opportunity. I think you could have gone really, like, hard and deep with the character drama. I think with Series 10 being such a chill series, I think this was the point where you should have hammered, like, home the impact of this moment and had Bill, like, really shift as a character, and I think you could have done a lot more with her in that regard. And then on top of that, there's just a small issue with the writing I have, in the sense of the Doctor doesn't really have any reason not to sneak past the Blue Man earlier than he does, because he obviously explains to them how the black hole works and all that, which is good for the audience. But having rewatched that scene, it's very clear that when the guy puts his gun down and his guards down, there's many opportunities the Doctor could have gone past him. And the reason why I say this is because he's wasting time, valuable time, where one of his best friends is dying downstairs over years of time, and that's not something that he should be doing. And I think him wasting time was silly, and it kind of makes him look a bit stupid, especially when you consider when they get to the elevator. I think Missy says something along the lines of, like, it's either like 10 minutes or half an hour. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but she commented on how long he spent up there, and it wasn't necessary. I think that scene needed to be restructured in the sense of, like, the Doctor shouldn't have had any opportunities to go down. He should have been in a panic, and it should have been a case of, like, where he's forced to explain the black hole and is constantly thinking about, well, Bill's down there. I think there should have been more urgency, and the fact that there wasn't, to me, takes away from the episode a bit. Apart from those three things I have, everything else is absolutely perfect.
That's a pretty good run-in for an episode if those are the only things that niggle. I mean, again, like we've saying, like I mean, I think a lot of the fandom's in agreement that this episode, on the whole, is pretty damn good. I love everything with John Sim, as you said, as Razor. Missy as well. Like, I love Missy in this episode. With the way Michelle Gomez is always brilliant, but I just love, like, and I love that whole thing at the start. The whole, you know, hello, I'm Doctor Who. Like, I loved it. Like, I know it's self-aware and self-referential, but I don't know. It just brought a big smile to my face.
I think the dab is probably going to age.
There's always one little bit, but yeah, like that whole like scene, you know, the whole setup of it, I really liked.
Yeah. There is no getting around it, though. It absolutely was Moffat being self-indulgent.
Oh yeah, I mean, not like he's done that before, but yeah, I love the Cybermen are great, as you said, like the whole, again, re-emphasizing the body horror aspect, which is something weirdly in New Who they sort of did do in series 2, and then never really to memory did it that much again, which is a bit odd.
Honestly, I would say like series 2 and series 10 are like the only times I knew who I think they really nailed the Cybermen. Because apart from that, I don't really care for many others. I suppose Haunting of Villa Diodati I do like. I like that.
I like that as well. I just think because body horror is such a core component of what make the Cybermen so terrifying, to like not focus on that for so long just feels a bit bizarre. But yeah, they're handled great, like the whole build up. And like you said, even though we knew John Sim was coming, and like you could probably say, oh, it's Razor, of course it is. Like as I said, the reveal, especially that initially he's revealed not to the Doctor, like when he pulls it's to Missy, which I think works great. Yeah, the whole cliffhanger, like with Bill, Azamon, Dassey, and Cybermen, which are already creepy anyway. But the fact that it's Bill, and that it's that shot of Bill saying "I waited for you," and you've got the two masters standing either side of it. It's a great cliffhanger, and just like it's a brilliant. It's exactly how a penultimate episode should end. It's that cliffhanger that makes you like you can't wait for the next episode. Like you want to find out what happens right here, right now, and it's very
exciting. I love the twist at the start where we see her at the university saying to the Doctor, "Well, just don't get me killed," and this is after we've seen her being shot in the future. The fact that it was the Doctor let his guard down and he was being casual, and that let that disaster happen. When Bill goes into the hospital and the Cybermen are saying, "Pain. Kill me. Kill." It's some of the scariest scenes in Doctor Who. That nurse as well, she's very unsettling.
Yeah, it's everyone's phobias about like creepy hospitals come to life, but it's done so well. And that whole thing about, as you said, Bill being shot after saying "don't get me killed," it's a trope that New Who does sometimes, but it's a very powerful trope. It's this thing of you think about traveling with the Doctor and you think, oh, of course, it's brilliant. I get to wander through time and space and it's all magical. But there is, of course, this very real element that your life is constantly in danger. And some people say, oh, it's overplayed. But again, it's an interesting idea, and it's a powerful idea, to explore the ultimate opposite to the joys of traveling in time and space is it could get you killed.
Absolutely.
And we see... I mean, of all stories to bring up, but, the whole thing of Trial of a Time Lord, one of the arguments is the Doctor puts, intentionally or otherwise, his companions in mortal danger. And I know it's sort of changed at the end, but we sort of see that with Perry in Mind Warp, and you see it in the modern series as well. And I always like seeing it rear its head, this idea that, traveling with the Doctor can result in death. It sort of goes back to what we were saying about Russell T Davies with the finality of things. Yeah. And I know the ending of the next episode is a bit, but we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But I think that this is something that makes, like, I think a perfect example of a story that really hammers home this is the Daleks' master plan. Katarina and Sarah Kingdom's deaths aren't gratuitous. They are there for a purpose, and they really, really aid the story's stakes and its consequences, and what that does to the Doctor and Stephen as characters in that story is absolutely devastating, and it's such powerful drama, and because it's not reversed, it's not undercut either.
This story, and I will defend the Doctor Falls when we get to it, because I know a lot of people say it's this so-called curse of that everything drops off with the final episode in the Capaldi era, which I, as you know, disagree with. But I mean, I think a lot of, do you like the Doctor Falls, like in general, or?
So this is an interesting one. When I first watched it, I actually liked it more than World Enough in Time, believe it or not.
Okay, no, I see that. I think a lot of people have that.
I think it's because I already knew what was going to happen in World Enough in Time. I had it spoiled for me. Whereas I had no idea what was going to happen to Doctor Falls. Some of the twists in that episode really caught me off guard, and I think that's why I liked it so much. Looking back on it, I think it's still a really good episode. I think it's better than some people say. I don't think it's as good as some people say. I still personally love most of it, but there are things about it that I'm not keen on. So it's a big one, so I suppose I should just get into all the different elements. So, like we said when we were talking about Light of the Land, I think this is one of Pearl Mackie's best performances. One of my favourite elements of the Doctor Falls is the scene where she looks in the mirror and sees herself as a Cyberman. I think that's one of the best scenes in this story. So that element of it's great. I think it's one of Capaldi's best performances. I think it's probably Michelle Gomez's absolute best performance. I think she absolutely nails it out of the park in this with her performance. She's amazing, especially considering you get that scene where the iconic, you know, I do what I do because it's right, because it's decent.
Oh yeah, the speech,
which is really well done, because I love the way Murray Gold just cut the music for that scene and just let the actors say what they needed to say. It has it was very raw emotion, which is something that I felt like a lot of the Moffat era was missing for me. Like, there's a lot of emotion in the Moffat era, but a lot of it's very airy-fairy and but there is something about it that doesn't feel as real to me as other eras of the show. But in this episode, the part where he does that speech is one of the parts of the Moffat era that feels the most like real drama, and that hits a lot harder for me than some of the more sort of over-the-top stuff that we got, especially with like Smith era. And so I love that scene for that. And also, we obviously get John Sim back as the proper master, and he's much more in the vein of the classic masters in this, obviously, because they removed the drums from his head somehow after End of Time. It's very quickly explained. But basically, John Sim gets to play a more Delgado-like master. I have somewhat mixed feelings on this. I think, on one hand, I think John Sim's performance is absolutely spectacular. I think he's really, really good. But the other thing is that, for me personally, I think I made a tweet about this recently, I don't find his master in this as entertaining or as purposeful or as developed as he was in Series 3, for example. I do think that his master isn't as central, and that's to a point. Obviously, he's meant to be there to aid Missy's story. She's the focal point of the piece. But I do think that there is somewhat of a step down in terms of focus around his character in this. Obviously, I think he's great as Razor. Fantastic. In The Doctor Falls, he's a lot of fun, and he plays an important part in Missy's character, but I do think he gets he's a little bit secondary, and he's more there to enjoy in The Doctor Falls, I find. I love the bit where he says, he calls the Doctor Grandad. I thought that was really funny. And I love the bit where the Masters kill each other. I think that was probably my favorite scene that I saw when I first watched it. I did not see it coming, and I thought it was absolutely excellent the way that they like kill each other. I thought it was so poetic,
and because it works as well. Like, some say, oh, it's a bit silly, but it's like, if you know these characters though, like, it makes absolute sense.
Yes, of course. One bit I'm not too keen on though is when Moffat couldn't keep in his pants, and he had the whole like the master gets a boner to himself thing. I mean, I suppose it kind of makes sense, but at the same time, I'm like, no, just don't do that, please.
I know what you mean. I feel it's like, because like you say, it does of course it makes sense that the master would fall in love with himself.
And it's crazy, because like the way that the John Sim delivers it, I'm like, that feels so in character for Harold Saxon to say that.
Yeah, I just feel like because Moffat has been, one word, rampantly horny throughout his tenure. Yeah. Like, because we're so used to it at this point, that's what ruins it. Because instead of going, oh, this is actually really funny because this would probably happen, you sort of go, oh, here he goes again.
And also, like, you think about like how with Bill Potts, he obviously made her a gay character, and he didn't sexualize her at all, and so it's almost like he has to take it out on someone. So he took it out of the Masters.
It's one way of, but yeah, I think it's that weird one where, like, I do think it works, but it is just spoiled by the fact that when you watch like the entire Moffat era, you just think, oh god, like, it, you know, if none of the rest of it had happened, then it would have been a lot better. But because it does, it's like, okay. But no, I see what you mean. Yeah,
and it's also like, it's just weird thinking like, like, imagine if like Roger Delgado had said that to Anthony Ainley. It just would have been so bizarre.
It's a bit odd, yeah.
The Doctor Falls on the whole, I think, is really good, and also I love Nardol's exit as well. I thought that was a really nice touch. I think it was great that they didn't overplay it. Like I said, some of the things in part one that weren't as developed, like the side characters, because they weren't as developed, I didn't really get to know them as well, so their impact wasn't as great. And also, the Cybermen are really fun, like, you know, actiony Cyberman story Dr. Falls is, but obviously it does remove a bit of that body horror, apart from the Bill scenes. So I can see why some people were disappointed by that. It is a bit of a, you know, it goes a bit more Hollywood
and having the Mondasian Cybermen fly,
yeah,
etc.
Some things like, you know, like the apple and the gun and then you got him like blowing up Cybermen with the sonic screwdriver. It was like, okay, I can deal with this, but like, you know, sometimes when they overuse the sonic screwdriver, I'm just a bit iffy on that. But I suppose it makes sense. I do love the bit where battling these Cybermen and he gets shot by Mondasian and he says, "I'm not just a doctor, I'm the doctor, the original, you might say."
Yeah. Nice
and I love
callback.
And honestly, I think I know we'll get to Twice Upon a Time because I know you have thoughts on that. But
I do.
For me personally, I think the line, "I hoped there would be stars," would have been a really nice last line for the 12th Doctor if they did go down that route. Like if Chris Chibnall didn't, you know, cause Moffat to have another episode, I think that would have been a really nice last line.
It would have been. I agree. Like I know I mean we'll get to Twice Upon a Time, but if it had all ended with the Doctor falls, I would be completely happy with it as it stands. Yeah. On the whole, like I'm absolutely with the Doctor falls all the way. I love it right until the resolution with Bill, basically.
Yes.
We sort of mentioned it before.
Yeah, I was building up to that. Yeah. That's the one big like gripe, and unfortunately, it's made worse by the fact that it's not just because if it was something like Voyage of the Damned, for example, where rather than being stone cold dead, she gets sent off into the stars like a sort of spirit in the afterlife. Yeah, I could maybe have accepted it, but because it's actually no, she gets brought back to life, and it's even confirmed in the lockdown short that her and Heather went back to Earth and all was well. I think that really it really undercuts the story, unfortunately, which is a shame.
Especially as a whole, because you think about what Bill. It's even more tragic if it hadn't have happened, considering what Bill's been through, not just in this story and becoming a Cyberman, but also just throughout her journey. Like again, referring back to Lie of the Land, the emotional trauma she's been through, and I'm not trying to say every companion with the Doctor has to have this journey where it's painted out as an emotional tragedy, but I just think it would have been such a good twist, considering a lot of this series, as we said, is very jubilant, very fun, very revelry, and then all of that to come crash. I think that could have worked really well.
Yeah, but I also think, and this is me sort of like rewriting Series 10, I also think that you could have had it be quite a triumphant moment, not just be dark, because the way I would have done it is obviously Twice Upon a Time wouldn't have happened for me, and what I would have done is I would have had, you know, the scene in Caves of Androzani when the Doctor carries Perry back to the TARDIS.
Yeah,
I would have had that, but instead Bill carries the Doctor back to the TARDIS, and she leaves him in here. In that she leaves him in the TARDIS and she walks out and passes away outside the TARDIS. Like, obviously, it's very heartbreaking that you're watching Bill die, but she dies knowing she saved his life. I think that would have been a really nice, bittersweet moment.
Yeah, no, it would have been. And it is like we said in Series 9 with Clara. Like I said, for the most part, I do enjoy Hellbent, apart from the notion of Clara traveling away in a diner.
Yeah, because Bill and Heather is very similar to Clara and me, isn't it?
It's this thing again of like again, I say there is nothing wrong with a happy ever after ending, but like considering the stakes of this finale in general, and again what Bill's been through. Like, sure, in my instinct would be it's more impactful and more watchable as a story rather than going, oh, so they all go off happily ever after sort of thing. It's just, some say, oh, but it gives her, you know, she gets the love she wanted with Heather. I would have been completely fine if maybe, even if, you know, she's dying and she saw Heather before she died. Like, I would have been fine with that completely. But the fact that Heather has this, again, like you were saying near the start about her being overpowered, this unexplained power to sort of make Bill like her.
Yeah,
but also
imagine if it was like she saw Heather and Heather had the power to like ease the pain, and so she like dies very peacefully. Like that would have been quite a sweet moment. I think it would have been. It would have been a drop of magic that's actually touching rather than overbearing. I think.
Yeah. No. I just it's. it's just one of those things, like, because on the whole, like, I could gush about the Doctor Falls in its own 3-hour video, but, like, I just think, as I say, I'm with it all the way. Everything you've said, like, you know, the moments with where it flips between Bill and Cyber Bill are fantastic. Nardol's exit is really well handled. The stakes of what's going to happen to these people, you know, the impending doom that the Cybermen are coming, the two masters, it's all brilliant, but it's literally just this one thing. It's like you can't. And I don't know if there was an original plan, because obviously Bill does appear in Twice Upon a Time, but I know it we'll get to that. But I don't know if that had anything to do with it. But I just yeah, this is, if I could pick even one moment in the Moffat era where a character should have just been allowed to die in a graceful and impactful way, it would probably be this.
For me, it's either this or Clara in Face the Raven. It's one of those two. Do
you know what? I would probably take this with Bill dying over like leave Hellbent as it is and let Bill die. I'd probably take that, you know, if I had to pick.
Oh yeah,
if it was one and the other, you know.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, it is tough, but like I think for me it's easier because
I'm just trying to think. Do I want the Doctor Falls to be like a perfect masterpiece, or do I want Hellbent to be less painful than I find it to be? It's a good question, I think. I think it's a really good question to be asking.
Yeah, I think it's easier for me in a way because, as I said, like I enjoy Hellbent a lot more than a lot of people do. So even though I don't like the ending, I could happily live with it and have, as you say, the Doctor Falls be even more of a masterpiece. But I do it. Yeah, it's a difficult question depending on where you sit on the fence. But
yeah,
it's just
it's crazy though, because with Moffat, he gave all of his companions exits that I loved before he changed them. Like, I loved Amy and Rory's exit in the God Complex, but then I don't like their exit in the Angels Take Manhattan. And then I loved Face the Raven, but I don't like Hellbent. And then I loved what this story was setting up to be until like the last 5 minutes.
Yeah. It's this weird cop-out thing, and like, you know, to do it often enough, but then the fact he does it 2 seasons in a row, like series 9 and series 10, it's like, and you know, the detractors say to me, oh well, you can't have every companion die, and I'm like,
yes, but you also shouldn't resurrect him the same way, because he did it with River Song and Forest of the Dead as well, which, to be fair, at the time was not as repetitive.
Yes, that's why it probably works better there, because it's not as repeated. But I just think like the whole, if you really want to run with this, everyone has to have a happy ending. Fine, but at least do it in find different ways to do it than just resurrected because that's, you know, I don't know, but aside from that, Dr. Falls, I don't understand when people say they think it's not as good on the whole as World Enough in Time. I'd argue it's on par, in my opinion.
I think maybe just people aren't as interested in it because it takes, I think especially with Classic Who fans, because World Enough in Time is very plot heavy and it's very focused on the body horror, so it's much more sensational in that regard, and it's also, like I said, plot heavy, so Classic Who fans are going to prefer that. And then with the Doctor Falls, it's very character driven, and the plot is kind of secondary, and I think that might be what turns people off, and also the fact that the Cybermen aren't as horrific.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Like a nitpick I do have is I don't like seeing the Mondasian Cybermen fly. I think that's a bit weird.
I think that's something a lot of people agree on. It's just a bit. Yeah. It is a bit odd. I know plot convenience or whatever, but yeah, it is just a little bit odd.
Yeah.
But and I mean, obviously, the very ending of, you know, with the Doctor starting to regenerate and refusing. I've mentioned this in other videos, but I don't think I mentioned it here. Is I love the idea of a Doctor who does not want to merely change and go on again, but a Doctor who, without wanting to sound bleak, but a Doctor who is very much prepared just to die.
Yeah, I can see that.
I don't know.
I like that idea.
Because after all the lives he's lived,
I think I know that. You've had Samuel Davis on your podcast, right?
I have indeed, yeah.
Yes, so I know he's a massive fan of Twice Upon a Time. One of the reasons why is he thinks it's a really nice metaphor for like suicide, because in the sense of what you're talking about is the Doctor doesn't want to regenerate, he just wants to die. And then in Twice Upon a Time, he changes his mind and decides to live on. And Samuel Davis loves it because he thinks it represents people who are wanting to die and then they end up living on into another life as a different person within their same lifetime, if that makes sense. Like they change their personality. And I appreciate that notion and that idea a lot. Obviously, we'll get to Twice Upon a Time, but I do appreciate that idea. However, I do think it's wrong place, wrong time, and I would have preferred if The Doctor Falls was the last episode for me.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think, as I said, like a lot of people would prefer that. And again, when you watch it, like I hope there would have been stars. If, like, yeah, that is a brilliant final line to lead off with. But then I think that would have worked, and I think I've seen people say this before. That would have worked better, I think, if you were bringing the show to a complete close. Yeah. For the time being.
Yeah, I think some people have said it. And I think I heard Tom Vance say this. I sort of heard John Luke say this. I heard some. I think it was John Luke. I heard a couple of other people saying this too. But like The Doctor Falls, when you're watching it, it's like this could be literally the last episode of Doctor Who. And I remember as a kid, I had that exact same feeling with Journey's End. I was thinking this could literally just be the end of Doctor Who, and that would make sense. Yeah.
It's very much one of them, and I think because if you had that line and then a regeneration straight after, whilst it's more of a conventional regeneration. I feel, in my opinion, Twice Upon a Time adds so much weight and agency as to why the regeneration's happening in the first place, as opposed to had it just happened, purely as a result of the injury, and we got no further sort of comment behind it, I guess. That's just my thought anyway. But if you're talking like ending the show entirely, then yeah, Doctor Falls would have been the right place to do it.
Yeah, before we get to Twice Upon a Time, there's just one more thing I want to touch on with Doctor Falls. Is the kindness character arc for the 12th Doctor. That's a big part of his character arc, especially in Series 10, is the whole thing of being kind. And I like how in Extremis they foreshadow it with the whole without witness, without reward. And then he says it again in Doctor Falls. So, again, I really appreciate it in concept, and I think in execution it works in some areas. But it's difficult for me to fully buy every element of it when I consider that in the previous episode he made like a really reckless mistake. And this brings me to, and I think this is kind of, I think Twice Upon a Time will kind of blend into sort of my overall thoughts of the Capaldi era and his character. Because I find that the 12th Doctor often is given these ideas of what they want his morality to be like. But then sometimes I will find that it will contradict things I've seen before. So I'll give you an example, and then I'll give you another one. So we were talking earlier about Thin Ice and how there's that scene where he punches the racist, right? So it's like in a self-isolated sort of episode, the hero punches the villain for saying something bad, right? And it's like satisfying to see a racist get their comeuppance. But then I think about, well, what was he saying in the Zygon 2-parter about how violence is not the answer to war and like conflict? And it kind of, in my mind, it's a bit of a weird inconsistency, the fact that the 12th Doctor, not even one series ago, was so against using violence as an answer to conflict, and then you see him in a scene where he is using violence as an answer. And I just think that in both scenarios they are presenting a Doctor who has good morals, but those morals don't line up. And then in another sense, I think about like in the fact that in World Enough in Time he's made this massive reckless mistake. And also think about Lie the Land when he emotionally manipulated Bill as well. And he's doing that sort of thing. And obviously it's not completely his fault. Like, the World Enough in Time thing was a mistake. But then again, you got the thing about what I said about him being reckless and being silly and not in wasting time. And she ends up as a Sideman because he wastes time. And there's all this stuff that he does that's all a consequence of his actions. But then also you lump in this whole thing of him going into that graveyard and saying it's all about being kind. and I do it because it's right, because it's decent, and I just find it a bit odd. I just find it a bit odd how this character is simultaneously very reckless and makes a lot of mistakes and does a lot of cruel things, whether they be on purpose or accidental, and yet he comes out and says a speech like this. I just think it's a little bit jarring, and I wish that they ironed out some of that character development so that it would feel more consistent, so that I could fully buy it. Having said that, again, this is not like a sour grapes or anything. It's not as detrimental as things I've talked about in the previous 2 episodes, but it's just things that I've picked up on rewatching Series 10 that I'm like, this just doesn't quite work because of these reasons. And I think it's an issue across Moffat's era as a whole, is that he has ideas of where he wants to take characters, and often those ideas are excellent, but in execution there are things that contradict each other that get in the way of me fully buying it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I'll probably give my thoughts on that when we do like the sort of recap on it. Yeah, but no, it's interesting to hear.
But it's one thing that I did want to get off my chest. So we'll talk about Twice Upon a Time. Funnily enough, a few months ago, I did a live stream talk about Twice Upon a Time because Joe Brennan did a video on it defending it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so in that live stream, we watched his video and responded to his video, and basically, we had a discussion about it. Joe wasn't actually on the podcast, but we used his video as like a springboard off to talk about it. I'm sorry if this disappoints you, but I have found that the more I think about Twice Upon a Time, the less I like it. And
that's fair.
And like I said, obviously talking about like Samuel Davis's reason for why he loves it, and talking about your thing about the Doctor wanting to die and all that, and then realizing that it's better to live on. Again, I really like that idea and that notion. But for me, like a lot of the Moffat era, it's the execution where it loses me. There are many things in Twice Upon a Time that don't sit right with me. Probably the most obvious one is the characterization of the First Doctor.
Absolutely.
Everyone talks about that. It's just not the same. Like the Hartnell...
It's not necessary. It's not necessary.
Yeah, it's not necessary. The Hartnell Doctor is a enigmatic, mysterious traveler, and David Bradley's First Doctor is an old fart. Really. So I do like the scene where he tells the Doctor to take off his shades and be a bit more scientific, and there's a couple of nice moments, I think, with David Bradley, and I think his performance is really strong. I like Mark Gatiss' performance as well. I think he's really good in that. And Capaldi, again, like he puts in a really good shift, especially I think some of the last scenes he has, like his acting, especially on the battlefield, especially with some of the close-ups. There's some really good acting in there. And I like the whole idea of the fact that it's the last episode of the Moffat era and the last of Capaldi's, and it's an episode about memories. I think that's a cool idea. But.
Big but.
So, there's no plot. So, that means that...
What a way to kick off.
Because there's no plot, it means that it has to completely rely on the characters. So, firstly... not a fan of the First Doctor's characterization, so that's a problem. Secondly, Mark Gatiss' character throughout the story is enjoyable, but I personally don't like the retconning that the Doctor met one of the Brigadier's family before meeting the Brigadier. I don't like this idea of everything has to be put into place by the universe. Everything has to be meant to be. I prefer the idea that the Doctor just randomly met him in the Web of Fear and there was no destiny to it.
Yeah,
I think that's a bit saccharine for the Moffat to do that, and a bit overly sentimental to the character. Though I feel like maybe it could be possibly just a reaction to the backlash that Cyberbrig got. I'm not sure. I don't know. I really don't know what it is, but it's something. So that doesn't sit right with me. I also find the fact that Capaldi's Doctor is meant to be dying, and yet he's running around and smiling and jumping on chains and having fun, and is apparently not in any danger or in any pain, which is very strange. Bill's in it, I guess, which again, I don't like that because I don't like how it changes the ending, and even though it's a memory of her again, it's like I don't think it was needed. There's also another thing that I just remembered that I'm not sure how you feel about, but oh boy. So you already know how I felt about the ending of Hellbent.
Yes.
about the Doctor's memory being wiped. Well,
Yeah.
now, magically, the Doctor sees Clara and remembers her for apparently no reason. I don't know why.
He does.
It just happens.
Yeah, Clara,
you-
you're back in my head.
Yeah, and then you get Jenna Coleman on a really awkward green screen going,
Yeah.
"Don't forget me again, Doctor, because that was offensive."
A very Clara line, isn't it?
It was just kind of awkwardly executed. I don't know. It looked like she was floating.
Just to, if you don't mind me jumping on that
Yeah,
point,
go
just
ahead,
to
go
begin with, I
ahead.
know it's at the
Go
end,
ahead.
but like Moffat, one trend in modern Who, perhaps bar Eccleston because there wasn't much of it, is that when we come to a Doctor's regeneration, there almost now seems to be like a tendency that we have to address sort of everyone who's ever come through the TARDIS in this lifetime. And, you know, this is something that was started with, you know, Russell. Obviously, the 10th Doctor got his big send-off where he saw everyone.
To be fair, we did get it in Legopolis with Tom.
Oh, I was just talking about New Who specifically since the
true.
revival. But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we did get it in Legopolis and in like
Caves.
Androzani as well, yeah.
Yeah.
But with New Who, so they have that big send-off for the 10th Doctor. And then with Matt Smith, you get the little reference to Amy at the end, which is... like, it's cute. I'd argue it's not. Again, I'd argue it's not necessary in that moment.
I think it's meant to be sort of like. I think it's what it was meant to be. Was it was meant to be like how when he started, like he was Amelia Pond's imaginary friend, and then at the end of his life, she's his imaginary friend. I think that was what it was meant to be. And again, like a lot of Moffat stuff, I've said this so many times. I like that notion and I like the idea, but I'm not sure on the execution.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and I feel he felt, well, he must have felt he had to continue the trend here. It's like, oh, I've got to get, but like, again, like, I'd argue even the notion's not even a good notion. It's one of the few things about Twice Upon a Time I in retrospect, I think at the time I liked it because, you know, obviously, you know, you go, oh, it's neat, you know, Clara's there, you know, that's cute or whatever. But like in retrospect, like, just it's not, we don't have to have this trend of like when every Doctor dies that they have to somehow, unless it, you know, a flashback sequence like you get in the class, you know, that's one thing, but for them to like physically interact with every companion they've ever seen before they die, I think it was cool the first time with Russell, but like it doesn't, I don't know. I just, the thing with Clara, like, and again, it's so brief and it's so, as you say, there's no real explanation of it, really. And it's just, it felt like Moffat was just like, well, I want everything to, again, this like sort of happy ending, nice sort of bow tie. So I guess I'll just throw that in there. It's one of the few things about Twice Upon a Time I'm not really a fan of, the whole Clara reappearing. I enjoy Bill being there, and I enjoy Nardole popping up right at the very end as well.
They're enjoyable characters, but again, like I said, I just wish that their exits were their exits, if you get what I'm saying.
No, yeah. And if the story had framed it as these are just flashbacks who are there to like help you, it doesn't change their actual exit. You know, they appear, then they disappear. I'd be fine with that. But yeah, the Clara thing just it's. I think we're both in agreement. It just doesn't work on every conceivable level.
Because the funny thing is in the last video I was talking about how I thought the reverting of Clara's death and wiping his memory was kind of a little bit pointless and sort of taking back a lot of things I liked that were built up. And then on top of that, with Twice Upon a Time, it kind of doubles down, and now it's like, well, now that memory wipe was pointless. So it's just like,
well, yeah, exactly. So what? Now the Doctor just remembers that she was meant to go back to Trap Street, and has she done that? Is he going to check that? Yeah, it's all these, you know,
and now it's like, well, I guess the excuse is that now that he's regenerating into Jodie, she's going to not be as attached to Clara, and therefore she won't be driven to go back to her, I suppose.
But again, it's just but I don't know. Just the Clara thing's a bit flimsy. The Lethbridge Stewart thing, I don't mind him being a Lethbridge Stewart, but I do agree with you in the sense that I like the thing that he just randomly bumped into him in Web. Like I say, not everything has to be this destiny thing. Yeah. And the first Doctor, I really enjoy it, bar the random sexism for no real conceivable reason. Yeah. But I think what I take away the biggest from this story is, you think about a lot of the Christmas specials, like nearly all of them, and a lot of them are very, you could use a few choice words. You could use like, bombastic. You could use very extravagant. You could use whimsical. Not to any detriment, but those are words you could use to describe the new Who Christmas specials. They're very bright and vibrant. Lots of things going on. Big bad villain. Blah blah blah. What I loved about Twice Upon a Time on first broadcast and still now is that the fact that there isn't really a main villain. Like, you have these different characters like the memory thing, and you've got Rusty,
and
but there
Rusty
isn't
turns up.
Yeah, but there isn't really like, there isn't one overriding villain really throughout this no big bad to defeat, so to speak.
Yeah.
I loved it. I love a Doctor Who story that said, you know what? This Doctor doesn't necessarily have to go out with the biggest bang. He can just have this experience, moreover, with his first incarnation, or the first Doctor, I should say, and sort of learn from that sort of, again, that thing of that life is worth going on. But also what I love is when we get to that thing on the battlefield, even after all that, when he's sort of, because it's the ironic thing that he's helped convince the first Doctor to go on living, and the first Doctor is expressing a bit of doubt. But I love that even after everyone's gone, or when it's just him, Bill and Nardole, that the 12th Doctor is still not sure about regenerating. After all that, he's still, the whole why can't I rest, or why can't I lose, or whatever he says. I think, for me at least, it shows again like this sort of beautiful tragedy with this character that has lived for so long, and has lived so many lives, and has gone through everything imaginable. And I think, quite understandably, for a time, all they want to do is to just, even if it was for a moment, just let it stop. Like there's that great line in Thin Ice where he says, I'm over 2,000 years old and I've never had the luxury for outrage. And I sort of take that to mean a lot of his emotions as well. And that idea of just wanting to stop, not in sense of suicide, but I mean, for this character not wanting to regenerate, I just that hit me a lot, and I think it still hits with me. And I really like the notion, and I like the fact he does come around to doing it again.
One of the things that I've talked about, and we talked about this in Magician's Apprentice, is I don't like when Stephen Moffat imposes his own view of the show onto other parts of the show. And one of the examples I'm going to give is the line where he's talking to the first Doctor and he says, the universe is usually not a fairy tale, but that's when we come in. And
yeah.
I, on one hand, I can see why he's saying that, but on the other hand, I also don't like that it's recontextualizing the first Doctor a bit for me. It kind of changes the character, because I feel a lot of the notions and the ideas that Moffat has about the show are ones that are only really, I mean, to some extent they stretch, but they are only really present within his own era. Things like, children crying and the fairy tale element of the character in the show and just all that stuff. I personally don't think it's applicable to the show necessarily before he took over. And so when he goes and does something like this where he almost retcons the context of the show as this sort of very saccharine fairy tale, it just rubs me the wrong way, because I don't really like when the showrunner does that, when it sticks his fingers in other people's pies. And I really like the sort of more quiet death that the first Doctor gets in the 10th planet, where there's a bit of mystery, and it's just sort of, it's time for me to go. And it's far from being all over. I really liked that, and then for it to be this sort of, it's a lot different here. It's the way it's executed is very different to the 10th planet, and it doesn't feel right for the first Doctor for me. The first Doctor's character doesn't feel right in this context, personally. So
sure.
That kind of retconning is something that I don't appreciate, and it's the same thing with the whole Lethbridge Stewart thing. But the scene in this episode that for me that is the most egregious, and it's I would imagine you're probably going to disagree with me on that, and that's fair enough. But personally, I cannot get into Capaldi's regeneration scene.
Oh, okay.
Okay, firstly, it's long. It's very long.
It is.
I think his acting in the scene's great, and I love Taleli's direction in it, especially once it gets to Jodie. I think the direction in that element of it, the way it transitions, is really well done, and the music and all that. And I love the fact that it plays the shepherd's boy as his, in his final scene. I think that's really fitting. But the whole speech, the whole thing is just, it doesn't sit right with me. So you've got, listen here, Doctor, I've got a few things to say to you. And he runs through the, the classic sort of, never be cruel, never be cowardly, never ever eat pears. Does the whole, be kind thing that was part of his whole character, right? Which, as I've gone into, I did think that in some areas was a little bit forced. It goes on and on and on, and then you get the part that really gets at me is when he says, "Children can hear your name."
Right, yeah.
Which I thought was just a step too far. Now, I know that wasn't Moffat, that was Peter Capaldi wanted that line in there, but personally, I think that was a step too far.
Why do you think it was a step too far?
I just think it's just so... It's definitely breaking the fourth wall to some extent. Now, to be fair, they have done this before, but I personally think that, and again, this isn't like this is purely just something that I feel about the show. I don't like when the show is over sentimentalized to this degree. I think there is a line, and there is certainly sentimental parts of the show that I love, but this kind of focusing so much on the children can hear your name, the children know the name of the Doctor. It's just, it's too much for me. And it doesn't, and I get that it's part of Moffat's whole era, and he set it up in The Beast Below and all that, and it's all about the Doctor's connection with children is very strong, and it's true. The Doctor's connection with children is very strong because he's a lead character in a children's show. It's true. But I prefer it to not be done this way, personally. I think it's just too far. And it really does make me cringe. Like, really badly.
Well, I must admit, you're the first person I've heard who says it makes them cringe. That's a first. But that's fair enough. I can totally understand your reasons behind it. Like, it is a long scene. I think what mainly sold me on it, first and foremost, was the acting. Like you said, because Capaldi could read, I don't know, the side of a bean tin and make it sound very interesting.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So he absolutely sells it. The whole children thing, I think when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's a bit odd. But I don't know. There's something about that whole speech that for me, it also summates Capaldi's love of the character, if that makes sense, of the character he's playing. And maybe it just feels like he's taking all his experiences from being a fan as a kid to growing up. And it almost, and I know Moffat mainly wrote it, as you said, but it mainly feels like he's explaining to himself what the Doctor is, and if that's his personal interpretation, then he sold it to me. Like, I'm not saying if I was in his position I'd maybe necessarily say that, the line about the children can hear your name and stuff, but I think it's the fact that he sells it is why I buy it personally. It doesn't come off as cringe.
The performance is strong, I'll give it that.
But you just can't get past the cringe.
I just can't do it. It's not just with Twice Upon a Time, it's the whole Moffat era. I can't get over how saccharine it is and how much it focuses on the children. Like, you think about Beast Below, you think about Closing Time, you think about Night Terrors, you think about like the way the children view him in the time of the Doctor, and
someone please think of the children.
I know, and I just don't like it. I'm sorry. I just don't.
No, don't apologize. If that's your view, that's fair enough. Like, I don't like that over thing in places as well. But I don't know. I think because I was already on board with the story as a whole at this point, because the story, you could argue in many respects, is very like sentimental as a whole, and I was with it. So I guess by proxy, I was with this speech as well. But I think overall for me, I love this because it's not. It feels like it doesn't have to be this bombastic, big Christmas special thing that arguably, just thinking in my head roughly, arguably like all of them had been to some extent, prior to this. Even the more chilled ones like Husbands of River Song or Doctor and the Wizard and the Wardrobe, Last Christmas, they still felt like they had an air of like, that bigness about them, that this is a big Christmas special.
Oh yeah.
Whereas this one just allows itself just to be. And the way I see it now is like, if the Doctor Falls is a perfect ending, and it could have been the ending, this to me at least, Twice Upon a Time feels like a really sweet epilogue to end on.
It definitely
It's
is
like,
an epilogue, yeah.
And it's like, the Doctor Falls is the big final chapter where all the big events happen, and then this is just that nice little we're closing the book. And as I say, some things I don't like, the whole Clara thing, whatever. But like, do you know what I mean? Like, the whole air of it is, we're now going to close the book on this, but we're going to do it our way. And I love the setting of the whole World War One on Christmas Day, 1940. I think that's a beautiful setting for this version of the Doctor to end on the day that, despite everything else, people just came together.
Actually,
like, I love that.
Sorry to poop your
No, go
or
ahead.
anything. But there was one other thing I had just remembered, is I don't like how they foreshadowed the Time War for the first Doctor in this. Because you know how they...
the whole Doctor of War thing.
Yeah, I don't like that at all. I don't like how... I don't like how this recontextualizes the character in the show. And obviously, because it's a multi-Doctor story, the first Doctor forgets all of this, right? But I still don't like how it's trying to subconsciously put like red herrings into the first Doctor's mind. For me personally, that's not my ideal of what storytelling is. Storytelling for me is very cause and effect, whereas sometimes Moffat can get very, it's all gonna fit together like a jigsaw, and I just don't think that's quite necessary all the time, especially when you're dealing with other creators' characters rather than just your own.
Yeah, see, that's interesting, because for me, I don't mind I think there's a difference between, because like, he's going to forget. I think there is something interesting in showing past Doctors future events and seeing how they would react to said thing, even though they will forget. But like I say, planting red herrings that imply it subconsciously goes on, that's different. But no, I like how, for the most part, the first Doctor is used in this. Obviously, apart from the stuff we've mentioned, like the random sexism and things like that. But
there's that, like we said in the last video, that bit where he looks at the sunglasses and he's like, "Watch browser history."
He had to do it one more time, didn't he? He had to get it one last time. Got it in the first episode. Got it in the last episode. Thanks, Moffat. Brilliant. But. Yeah, no, like I'm prepared to throw my hands up like I did with Hellbent and say I'm not by any means saying that Twice Upon a Time is a perfect story, but just for how it impacts me and from how I connect to it with the whole low keyness of it and the metaphors I receive from it, I just think it's a really beautiful Christmas special, and for me, it's a very beautiful send off for this incarnation of the Doctor.
Well, I mean,
but I can see why people don't like it.
I think no matter what, it's difficult to dislike the regeneration story that your favorite Doctor has. I think that's a general rule. Unless of course your favorite Doctor is Colin Baker, then you might have a problem.
He's not, but yeah, I see what you mean. But but no, I do try. When we were coming into this, I've rewatched Twice Upon a Time recently, and I did try to. I was trying to be as fair as I can, like pick apart the bits I don't like we said, Clara, the sexism. Yeah. But I still have that same effect I had nearly 4 years ago, where it's just a very warm, very low key, but done in the right way for me. I got that same effect, and I think that's why I love it so much.
I think to sort of just relate to that a bit, I suppose I could say, like, no matter how many times I rewatch End of Time and as a critical mind find like issues I have with like the plot, I will never, ever be able to let go that feeling I had watching the 10th Doctor regenerate when I was a kid. Because he was my Doctor. And I feel like, again, it's like there is an emotional level to these kind of episodes that it's on a higher level than a lot of the critical elements, if that makes sense. It's a whole different field. And that's why I obviously understand and respect and, can relate to some extent why someone would love Twice Upon a Time if Capaldi is like their favorite Doctor or one of their favorite Doctors. Very sentimental to see someone that you're so invested in and so affectionate towards have their last story. So I can absolutely get that. It's just that for me personally, I do, and like I said, we've gone through this 3-parter thing, and I obviously have some, I do quite like Capaldi, especially as an actor, and there are parts of his character that I really liked, especially in like Series 10, for example. But it's not enough for me to look past what I don't like about the episode for me to rise above my criticism.
And that's fair enough. That is completely fair enough. Like, I'd never take that away from you. I just think it's, as long as whoever's watching, as long as they can hear both sides of the spectrum, whether you like it or dislike it, there will be people who will think the opposite for whatever reason that might be. That might just be because they think it's fun or they get certain things out of it. Like it's so I respect respect completely why you're not a fan, but yeah.
And on that, I'm very interested to see how Chris Chibnall handles Jodie's regeneration when she eventually goes.
Yes, that will be interesting.
I have no idea what it's going to be like, and I'm kind of hoping that it's very different to what we've seen before. Because like I said about how this regeneration, and also Matt Smith and David Tennant's to extent as well, and you could maybe even argue in a small way Chris Eccleston's too, they're all quite sentimental, especially Moffat's ones. I would be interested to see how Chris Chibnall handles it, to see if Jodie's Doctor handles it in a very different way. If there's anyone that would do a surprise regeneration, it's Chris Chibnall.
I mean, with what he's shown in the last 2 years, why not? Let's just go for it. We'll have to. Like,
imagine the Stolen Earth, except he actually regenerates. That's kind of the thing I would imagine Chris Chibnall would do.
Yeah, crazy. Man. That'd be. Oh, hey, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Like, what if actually I've got a bit of a pitch here. What if he actually did that, and then all the fans are like, "Oh, boo! Jodie didn't get to say a proper goodbye," and then when she comes back in the 60th anniversary, she gets a one little scene at the end before she goes away in her TARDIS to say goodbye.
Oh, wow!
I think that could be really cool.
That could be really cool. Hey, if the surprise regen, maybe Chris Chibnall, no holds barred, man. He does what he wants. So.
Yeah. Oh, he certainly doesn't hold back when he wants to make a decision. Jesus Christ.
That's a way of putting it, yeah. But yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, he's interesting.
Don't have anything more to say on Twice Upon a Time. I just think overall, if we were doing like era statements or whatever, is just my thoughts on the 12th Doctor is just based on what you were saying about, how 1 minute he says, one thing and then seems to do the opposite. One of the many things I love about this Doctor is, yes, he will go on these tirades about one thing or another and then maybe exhibit things that do the opposite. But I think this is one of the most flawed incarnations we've had. Not necessarily in the way they're played by the actor, because I think the complete opposite for that. But I think the flaws really work for this incarnation. I like seeing a Doctor try his best to do right, the whole never cruel nor cowardly thing, but on occasion fail, like we saw in Hellbent, like we see in any instance in, like you say, when he shows a bit of violence. Because this whole thing, some people say, oh, the Doctor's never cruel or cowardly, he should always be like that. I'd always argue that's far less interesting than moments where he falters from that, intentionally or otherwise. Well, because it makes it...
I think it is, the intention is meant to be that he tries to not be cruel or cowardly, but sometimes he is. I think that's the...
Yeah, and I like that in this Doctor. I like, I mean, like we said, the whole thing about being a good man.
I will say, personally, as much as I do like Capaldi in some areas, I do think that kind of complexity, I prefer it with some other Doctors.
Okay.
In terms of execution, and a lot of it goes back to the fact that I can put all the pieces together. Whereas with Capaldi, I think conceptually, he's like the best idea of a Doctor there's ever been for me. Mm-hmm. Like, on paper, the Capaldi Doctor sounds like exactly the kind of thing that I'd have at the top of my list, right? One of the best actors ever, all of these complex ideas and like the brusque humor and the character arc and the really biting personality with the battling with his companions and all that. And all of that stuff that we've discussed over the last 3 videos, on paper, sounds like a perfect Doctor to me. But why he doesn't rank as high as a lot of others is down to, in my opinion, the execution. And it's just, a lot of it is that, part of it is that it's not just about the concept and the ideas and the notions that the characters are going for. It's how it all fits together. And I find that Stephen Moffat is sometimes a bit big for his own boots. And I think his ideas are very hard to get right, which I have respect for, that he goes big rather than going home. I respect that, absolutely, that he wants to do something special and not ordinary. But I think that because of that risk, he ends up making a few mistakes, and also because I find there to be a lot less justification for some of these risks it falls apart a bit. Whereas if I look at other incarnations that I would describe as complex, there are instances where I would say the execution is not just done better, but done so well that I can give you an entire layout of their entire era and give you all the different points of why this character changed in this point. Like I could do that with the 10th Doctor, for example. And I think he's quite a complex character in some ways. And part of the reason why he's my favorite is that I feel, obviously, like any character, not perfect. Although, to be fair, I think the 9th Doctor has a pretty good argument for being perfect. I can't think of anything even wrong with Eccleston. But with Tennant, not a perfect character. But for the most part, I think a lot of what happens is justified, despite what some people think. And I can really pinpoint all of the different nuances of his character, why they happen, where they happen, and all the big risks that are taken, all the big shifts, like the Time Lord Victorious, like when he belittles Martha Jones, like when he grapples with having a god complex, like when he has to battle with the fact that he can never live a life like a human and have a partner instead of with a family, like when he has to lose his best friend. All of these things, there's so much good build up to it, there's so much justification for it, there's so much earned drama. With Capaldi, all of the pieces are there to create a Doctor that is just as good, if not better, but I just find these pieces don't fit together as tightly as other Doctors do, and unfortunately that's why he ranks a bit lower for me.
That's fair enough. I think a lot of the reasons why Capaldi is my favorite is from an, as I've said before, like from an acting standpoint, like as an actor myself, like whenever I watch anything now, like part of me, it's just sort of built in, I look for the acting. And I honestly think he is nothing against anyone else, but I think he's the best actor we've had in the role, in my opinion. I believe every word he says, and I can't say that for some of the other Doctors for one reason or another, but I was with him from the word go, and like I was with him till the end, and I loved, as we've said, the softening, if you like, of his character. I like that idea. Is it a bit too sharp in the middle? Yes. But, like, if you see where he starts in Series 8 and finishes in Twice Upon a Time, I love that. I do love that shift in how he's come with his character. I do think it is a justified shift. And I love his interactions with people, not just his companions. Like, he has some of the best dialogue, I think, of any Doctor when interacting with just anyone. And a lot of his stories I love for, as we've discussed in these videos, various different reasons. And even the ones that aren't loved, like Hellbent, there's still a lot I enjoy about them. And most of that is down to him as a performer. So whilst I always say he's my favourite Doctor, because he is, from like, you know, a acting standpoint. And Series 8 is my favourite season, because I feel everything, for me at least, clicks into place, you know. Stories, performances, things that are going on. It's probably not my favourite overall era, if you like, maybe. If you compare it to, like, you know, I mean, like yourself, David Tennant in many respects was my Doctor, one I grew up with. His era, I would probably agree with you that it is more tight, it's more secure, as you say, everything fits together.
I will say you do have to watch Chris Eccleston's, though, for it to really properly work, because they're very interconnected.
Yeah, well, that's where I started, so that's it's beautiful in that respect. But yeah, I just feel the Capaldi era is always gonna hold a big place for me, partly because of the man himself, but also, again, like you said, with the ideas that they tried. Not all of them work, like we've discussed in these videos. Not all of them work or land correctly, but certainly with what was tried in this era, like they tried to really make Doctor Who something different but familiar at the same time, especially in Series 8. I will always appreciate it for that, I think. And like I said in the very first episode, Series 8 in particular, like the Capaldi era was at a time in my life that I think suited me the most. Like it clicked with me in the best way, you know, from the ages of 18 to 21, maturing into adulthood, and the show sort of felt like it was doing that as well, in my opinion. So I feel if I'd have gone through this era at any other time in my life, I probably wouldn't have had as much affinity with it as I do now. You guys, you can come at me in the comments and say it's all my reasons are rubbish or whatever, but that's just how I feel. It's a very special era to me.
I don't think there's any reason to take away your personal experience with it. I think that's absolutely fair. I've always asked myself, like, if I watched New Who for the first time right now, would I be as fond of the Russell T Davies era as I am? I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that I am very fond of it. Because when I watched it as a kid when it aired, I loved it. And then when I revisited it in 2017, at a time in my life when I was feeling quite down, Doctor Who kind of saved me and made me like really uplifted my life and my motivations and just everything, my outlook and everything. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I rewatched Russell's era right at that point. And so again, like having that personal experience is a very big part of, you know, how you feel towards a show that's completely separate to critically analyzing it as a bit of craft, if you know what I mean. I think Series 10 is a bit more of a crowd-pleasing series than the other two. The other two are a lot more ballsy. And in that respect, if the execution of Series 8 and 9 was done more towards what I wanted, I would probably like them more than Series 10 because of how ballsy they are. But because of the execution, unfortunately, I'm not that fond of them. Whereas Series 10, it's more safe, but the execution is really solid for me. So that's probably why it's my favorite of the Capaldi era. And honestly, the Moffat era as a whole, because I'm not the biggest fan of Smith's era, if I'm being honest.
Me and you both there, I'm afraid.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I'd rather watch the Matt Smith era of Doctor Who than a lot of TV that's on. Like, you know, I would rather watch it than watch fucking, I don't know, like some of those like teen soap operas they have on Netflix.
Oh god, yeah.
Absolutely rather watch. Yeah, you know, like it's not the worst thing to ever be broadcast ever. It's just, when I think about Doctor Who, I think it's one of the eras that I'm like, oh, I don't really want to talk about that one too much. But I understand it has its fans, and to be fair, when I was young, I really liked it. So at some point in time, it was for me, but just not anymore.
Yeah.
That's
time, you know.
With Capaldi's, funnily enough, I've actually had the opposite. When I first watched it, I didn't care, and now rewatching it, I've grown more fond of it. Especially, I'd say Series 8 is probably the one I've grown more fond of recently.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear. Some Series 8 love.
Yeah.
But no, it's funny what time does to you. Like, you know, I say the Capaldi era will always be special. In years to come, it might fall slightly in my favour. But as you said, I don't think it'll ever lose that very special connection I have with it, just as like the time of life when I first saw it. So I think for that reason, it'll always be in high regard. But yeah, at the minute, anyway, as I said, I stand by that Capaldi himself, I think, is my favourite Doctor, because I think he's the best actor to have taken on the role from an acting standpoint.
Yeah, I thought this series that we just did with Capaldi era was very good.
Yeah, man, it's been great.
I loved talking to you all about it. I thought there was some really insightful and interesting conversations we had. There was not one time I felt like I was being attacked, or any time I felt like I needed to restrain. I felt like it was very controlled, it was very respectful, but it was also very passionate.
It was like a good balance of like, you know, passion without it spilling into anything personal. Which,
like, it was strong on an intellectual level, but then there was a lot of understanding as well of the other person's point of views. And I thought this was exactly what I wanted it to be. Maybe a tad long, but what can you do?
What can you do? Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought that was excellent. And honestly, I think this kind of thing is what I would like to see other people do, to be honest.
Yeah, man.
Twitter can be very dangerous and hostile at points, and I think this kind of conversation is what, you know, Who fans should be having. I think that our community would be a much better place if it was more like this.
Aside from it's been a great time, and for anyone who hasn't watched it in a while, highly recommend you rewatch the Capaldi era just to see, you know, like with us, if any thoughts have changed, and let us know in the comments. I suppose it'd be good to hear what other people think. And if you enjoyed me joining Connor here today, then check out my channel, just Adam Martin on YouTube. Yeah, that's all really, I suppose.
Yeah, some excellent interviews you got on there. I know you've got one upcoming at some point with Matt from the Who Eirich, right?
I do, yes, that's upcoming, yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to that. I know that you talked about Hell Bent with him, and I'm just wondering, did you film that after or before we did Series 9?
Afterwards.
Okay. That's interesting. So it's going to be a bit of a springboard off our discussion, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because I know how he feels about Hellbent. But
we had a good discussion about it. But it'll be good.
Go check out Adam Martin's channel. Go check out our Twitters. I hope you will enjoy this very long series. I thought it was great, and honestly, despite the fact that we've been here for 3.5 hours, that time absolutely flew by.
It did, man. Yeah, it's mad. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I'm kind of sad this is over because I've been looking forward to be doing this over the last few weeks.
Yeah, man. Well, if you get other guests on to do different eras, then you can keep the plot running.
If I were to discuss things with other people, I would just hope to find someone that's as articulate and as respectful as you are. That makes sense?
No, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I just think there's nothing wrong with hearing different opinions, even if they don't. Twitter's not really designed for it, but I will always try my best on Twitter. If someone says, "Oh, I don't agree with you," I'll always try to include, like, "Oh, well, that's fair enough. We disagree," but I just don't see point in getting hostile over a different opinion. If it if someone's coming after you personally, then of course defend yourself from that. But if if it's hostile over an opinion about a television show, then it's like, come on, we can do better. So this has been great, and I hope if you do more, I'll definitely check those out, and I hope more people take inspiration from this and have, as the word at the minute is, discourse similar to this. So
if any of you watching have any suggestions of errors and also guests that I would have possibly good discussions with about, then maybe leave it in the comments. I thought this was a grand success, and I'm glad that we did it, and I don't have much more to say other than that. So I suppose thank you all for watching this series. I hope you loved it like we did. I will see you again some other time for some other video. Bye bye.
See you later.